Chapter 493. In Luo Nan's eyes, the Wraith Sign's body had already formed its own space and time. There was a boundary of primal chaos in the middle that accommodated the growth and transformation of the Blood Soul Temple. It was extremely mystical. However, the Blood Soul Temple's power clearly increased by a large margin after the altar took form. This power quickly manifested itself outside. The entire mountain released a boundless bloody light that bombarded the surrounding primal chaos. The Blood Soul Temple was undoubtedly fighting over territory with the Wraith Sign, which bore it. However, the Wraith Sign's control over the Blood Soul Temple did not decrease. Instead, it increased. The surrounding primal chaos remained majestically unmoved despite the 10,000 streaks of bloody light. It easily digested the countercharge of the Blood Soul Temple. This kind of control, Luo Nan was a bit pleasantly surprised. The Wraith Sign had indeed advanced a step earlier. The mushed-mouth ape he had hunted before had more or less manifested the growth of his combat power. But in essence, he still had a look at the hierarchical structure of the Order frame. Though the Wraith Sign's origins were mysterious, it was hard for Luo Nan to distinguish who was stronger and who was weaker when compared to the similarly unfathomable Blood Soul Temple. This was especially true after both of them advanced. It was even harder to judge. Luo Nan was finally able to confirm that the Wraith Sign was indeed on the level of the Order frame, firmly suppressing the Blood Soul Temple by a head. Both sides had advanced, but the gap between the two had not shrunk. Instead, it had increased a step further. However, Luo Nan was unable to tell just how much more ability the Wraith Sign had gained after its advancement. After all, Luo Nan was limited by the monotonous living environment of the Cloud World, and he had not encountered any powerful enemies. Luo Nan was not crazy enough to go against Gong Qifeng with the Wraith Sign. Luo Nan's thoughts circled around a few times. The Blood Soul Temple's 10,000 streaks of bloody light continued for a few rounds. In the end, it was to no avail. In the end, Luo Nan calmed down and used more of the energy obtained from the formation of the altar on his own body. According to the information revealed by the Blood Flame Order, the construction of the 2,000 steps of the Bloodfire Path had been completed. The entire structure of the path had been constructed. The remaining 120 steps, the sixth stage, would be an internalized upgrade of the entire Blood Soul Temple. Luo Nan could not tell if it was internalized or not, but he could see that the bloody light was absorbed by the internal structure of the Blood Soul Temple. The internal structure of the Blood Soul Temple was different. Of the 5 internal structures, the stone forest at the bottom was the place where impurities were gathered and converted. The magma formed a lake, and the total amount of bloody light was the most. However, it was constantly changing, and it did not accumulate. The courtyard garden on the second floor was where the shepherd marks were stored. There were originally 4 marks. Renhong's mark had been forcefully pulled out of the Blood Soul Temple by Luo Nan using the heavily chained crow. The mark had died from the backlash. The remaining 3 marks were left behind by Lady Halder, Inlu, and the deceased Emolun. At that moment, the sanguine light in the garden was like a veil or fog. It was dense but not dense. They arrived at the 3rd layer of the structure, which was a cave built next to the mountain. There was no doubt that this was where most of the bloody light was gathered, so much so that the internalized bloody light simply couldn't go up when it reached this area. It was congested and filled up, forming waves of blood that pushed all the way up until it was overflowing. It was only then that the blood light regained its mobility and surged toward the 4th floor and the altar at the top. Luo Nan stopped looking at the structure above him. He focused his attention on the inside of the cave. It was called a grotto because the structure of this place was somewhat similar to the grottos of ancient Eastern Buddhism. Especially in the depths of the grotto, there were some blurry stone structures carved out of the mountain. Each and every one of them was muddled and faceless. Even their figures weren't very clear. But after the blood light internalized, the internal structure of the grotto clearly deformed. The blurry outlines of the stone statues began to protrude under the wash of the bloody light. Numerous cracks appeared on the surface, and an even thicker amount of bloody magma seeped out from the cracks. The magma began to reshape the stone statues once more. A few seconds later, a clear outline of a stone structure appeared in a corner of the grotto. It was like the chisel of a skilled craftsman. It wasn't lifelike, but had both form and spirit. So Nan was able to recognize it with a single glance. The mushmouth ape. Before Nan could figure out what was going on, one of the 4 shepherd marks floating in the courtyard garden was suddenly pulled by an incorporeal force. It was pulled out from the structure of the garden. It followed the flow of the bloody light and rose step by step. Soon, it reached the 3rd floor of the grotto. The shepherd mark was pulled up by a dense tide of bloody light. It was forcefully slapped into the outline of a stone statue. In an instant, bloody magma erupted from within. Cracks grew everywhere, and the grotto trembled. In just a few seconds, another clear stone statue condensed in front of the mushed-mouth ape statue. It also had both form and spirit. Its entire body was that of a middle-aged man in his 50s or 60s. His appearance was haggard, but his posture was upright. Even though he was outlined by the mountain rocks, his facial features and expression possessed a fierce momentum. The bloody light lingered around the stone statue. It was a mixture of light and darkness. The light and shadow were unfathomable. Nan's consciousness paused a bit before he dared to confirm. Emolin, a senior elder of the Blood Flame Order who had fought Tian Bang, the super burner who was closest to being extraordinary, with his mysterious and unpredictable soul body of black smoke. Emolin, who had died many days ago. Nan's consciousness remained within the grotto. It shuttled in and out, unwilling to leave. The stone statues weren't living people, but at this moment he could clearly feel a life force that was leaping and ready to move. This life force seeped out from the 2 stone statues. Of course, it was a bit different from a living person. Its order was much worse. It was more direct, more violent, and more destructive. This was most likely a mutation of the Blood Soul Temple's power. However, the most marvelous thing was that the 2 stone statues both originated from the Blood Soul Temple's power. There was a clear difference between the 2 statues. Not only did this grotto sculpt statues of Olin and the mushed-mouth ape, it also faithfully reflected the differences between the 2. From form to spirit, it touched upon various planes. It was truly inconceivable. Nan's consciousness wandered about the grotto. It went back and forth over and over again. The more he experienced the subtle differences, the more he felt that there were some extremely profound truths within. It was to the extent that his mind unconsciously transmitted other thoughts. Such a mystical sculpting of the stone statue. Such a detailed reproduction of the aura. It couldn't be that it was just for people to admire, right? As a sacrificial tool of an order, it should have some more practical functions. Unfortunately, the people of the Blood Flame Order had already fled to D City, which was over 10,000 kilometers away. The Wraith sign that bore the Blood Soul Temple didn't possess any intelligence. Luonin couldn't find someone to ask, so he could only ponder blindly. His consciousness circled around the grotto again and again, probing layer by layer. Occasionally, he would use his telepathic thoughts to issue an order or something, but it was all to no avail. Could it be that he needed to chant an incantation or form a hand seal? If he needed the so-called secret technique of the Blood Flame Order, then things would be awkward. Nan circled a few times, but he was unable to grasp the gist of it. He could only suppress the doubts in his mind and shift his consciousness away from this place. Right now, the Blood Soul Temple was very focused on internalizing the power of the bloody light into its entire structure. However, there were no signs of the final 120 steps of the Blood Flame path. Actually, according to the Blood Flame Order's plan, the Blood Soul Temple, which had already completed 5 stages, should have seized the Wraith sign long ago and become a part of the sacrificial tool. Just like Rinhong, who had already died a clean death. He probably didn't understand why the Blood Soul Temple wasn't able to devour the human-faced arachnid, losing their best opportunity. When all was said and done, the Wraith sign had devoured the Blood Flame Order's mold, the human-faced arachnid. This result was destined. Hold on. According to this, there should be a difference between the current form of the Blood Soul Temple and the sacrificial tool. It was inside the Wraith Sign's stomach, completely cut off from the outside world. It only relied on the essence energy that the Wraith Sign provided to it to survive. Luo didn't know what kind of effect this difference would have, but perhaps, should he try to spit this thing out? He definitely couldn't spit it all out. Who knew if he could control it? But if he could just externalize a portion of the Blood Soul Temple's power, it would be good to see the light and shadow effects. Luo had long since been unable to restrain the curiosity in his heart. He tried to send an order to the Wraith Sign, but then he felt that this order might be a bit complicated for the Wraith Sign's intelligence. Luo was pondering over how to simplify the order when the Wraith Sign's ugly mouth suddenly opened wide and its chelicerae vibrated. A ball of red light rapidly accumulated and expanded within the deep hole of the gloomy mouth. It filled the entire mouth in the blink of an eye, but it didn't shoot out in the first instance. Instead, it was like a charging laser cannon. It continued to accumulate power. The power contained within the red light originated from the Blood Soul Temple. Luo didn't know how the Wraith Sign did it, but it was able to easily divide this rebellious and untamed power and accumulate it layer by layer. Luo held his breath and calmed his mind, watching what the Wraith Sign was going to do next. Perhaps a second passed, or perhaps a bit longer, but the soul cloak floating in the cloud world suddenly trembled. The range was small, but it gathered all the movements within a range of several thousand kilometers. The environment was relatively monotonous. Although the range was wide, the amount of information wasn't great. Luo quickly grasped the most valuable part of the information. Within the range of the cloak, there were the locations of the 47 mushed mouth apes, the intensity of their power, and the relationship between their senses. And at this time, Luo clearly sensed that the Wraith Sign was aiming the accumulated red light within its mouth at the ape that was the least connected to the others. Target: Mushed Mouth Ape X. Distance: 1,723 kilometers. The energy was still accumulating, but the target didn't change. Was it really a laser cannon? Looking at the detection distance, it could be said to be a rail cannon, but could it reach that far? The red light within the Wraith Sign's mouth fired out noiselessly as Luo-Nan's thoughts ran wild. From the perspective of Luo-Nan, a psychic ability tester, this was an extremely spectacular scene. The surging power of an unfathomable nature pierced straight down from the depths of the mental plane. It instantly pierced through thousands upon thousands of mental curtains and rapidly approached the material plane. It began to interfere with the environment of the target area. The unfortunate mushed mouth ape, who was the target of the experiment, sensed at the moment the red light pierced through the polar domain, but it was already too late. The red light fell, and it was as if a rocky and lofty mountain peak was instantly pressed down on that area. The outline of the Blood Soul Temple was faintly visible. Chapter 494. It really was a railgun, but it wasn't just a railgun. This scene made Luo-Nan think of the dimensional crossbow that had put him in a difficult situation. At first glance, the firing form was far too similar. However, according to the follow-up research materials, the dimensional crossbow used by the self-proclaimed Luo Yuan had a foundation similar to the space-time fault of the logic realm. Moreover, it had an extremely powerful interference force towards the real world and the logic realm's extraordinary domain. It seemed to have a special operating mechanism. Luo-Nan's level of understanding was no longer sufficient when it came to this sort of deep theory. He didn't think any further. He continued to look at the situation in the area hit by the railgun. The red light contained an extremely powerful force. It dealt fatal damage to the target, the mushed mouth ape. But this destructive force was different from the destructive impact brought by the dimensional crossbow. Luo-Nan gazed at the Blood Soul Temple rising into the sky amidst the red and bloody light. This was an interference scene that seemed both real and illusory. Ultimately, this was the sufficient interference of the order framework of the Blood Soul Temple towards the mushed mouth ape. Or it could be said that the terrifying force catalyzed the forced transformation and deconstruction of the target. Oh, there was more to come. The scene of the Blood Soul Temple appeared for a total of 10 seconds before fading away. But the permeating red and bloody light grew more and more concentrated. It coiled and squirmed within the empty, cloudy void. It was like red-hot molten steel turning and taking shape within an invisible mold. When the scene of the Blood Soul Temple faded away completely, what remained in that area was still the mush-mouth ape. Its figure seemed to have shrunk by 2 sizes. It was only around 3 meters tall. Its body was curled up into a ball. It looked to be in a daze. The Wraith Sign didn't know what embarrassment was. But for a moment, Luo Nen felt a similar emotion, but soon dissipated. The interference scene wouldn't lie. The process of the mushed-mouth ape's transformation and deconstruction was clearly left in Luo Nan's sensory memories. There was absolutely no falsehood. Then, Luo Nen calmed his mind a bit. He shifted his thoughts through the soul cloak and carefully observed the details of the target. Then he discovered that the aura of the mushed-mouth ape he was paying attention to had a clear change from when he locked onto it earlier. The auras of the mushed-mouth ape were different from each other. It was similar to the difference between humans. Most importantly, this aura had become extremely familiar. Even though its body was curled up, the target, the mushed-mouth ape, was still surrounded by a powerful and violent life force. However, it lacked the order that a life should have, and the internal conflicts were about to be resolved. But if one looked closely, this violent vitality had temporarily achieved a dynamic balance under a certain formless framework that was more orderly. Luo Nan's heart thumped. He separated a portion of his mind and entered the Wraith Sign's body. He locked onto the grotto region within the structure of the Blood Soul Temple. That's right. This is the place. It gives off the exact same feeling as the 2 stone statues in the grotto. Interesting. Several thoughts flashed through Luo Nan's mind in quick succession. In the end, he executed an order through his soul cloak to his target, the mushed-mouth ape. Come here. The curled-up body of this mushed-mouth ape, which was now 2 sizes smaller, shrank once more without any delay. It actually transformed into a beam of bloody light that soared to the sky. It charged madly in the direction that Luo Nan commanded it to go. A normal mushed-mouth ape's flying speed was as fast as lightning, like a flying phantom. As for this mushed-mouth ape, it transformed into a bloody light and tore through the clouds. Its speed was several times faster. In less than 3 minutes, this small and exquisite mushed-mouth ape had already traversed the distance of 1,700 kilometers. It arrived beneath the cloud layer where the Wraith Sign resided. The extreme movement turned into extreme stillness in an instant. Only the aftermath of the impact from the splitting space still swept through the clouds, rumbling and echoing. 1,700 kilometers in 3 minutes. It was close to 30 times the speed of sound. The speed of this mushed-mouth ape was comparable to a high-powered electromagnetic gun. It could chase the wind and move like lightning. Seriously. A few minutes ago, Luo Nen never expected that the power of the Blood Soul Temple would surge outward and form an interference scene. In the end, it created a novice level for him. This clearly had something to do with the changes in the grotto on the 3rd floor of the Blood Soul Temple. All right, it's just a faster version of Yuan 1. Should I call it Yuan 2? Luo Nen mentally prepared himself in this way. He really wasn't as excited as he was when he controlled Yuani. He just secretly clenched his fist with the body he left in the real world. Luo Nen wanted to figure out what was going on. He put more effort into the changes in the sealed system. Though there was an additional Yuan 2, the number of believers orbiting the core star region in the living starry sky did not increase. Instead, the Wraith Sign's influence on the surrounding starry sky clearly increased. Its processing and manufacturing capabilities on the entire production line had a clear increase. At the very least, this proved that the mushed-mouth ape, Yuan 2, was not a newly accepted believer. Instead, it was just a tool created by the Wraith Sign through the special interference method of the Blood Soul Temple. Luo Nen did his best to find a basis for this phenomenon. Perhaps it was just like how his deep-sea scene needed Yuan E as a pillar in order to construct a relatively stable space. The power of the Blood Soul Temple also needed such a foundation in order to be able to display its power. Well, let's not talk about the details of the energy conversion. Using the Mushmouth Ape to exchange for the Mushmouth Ape, even if it was an accelerated version, was quite a subtle transaction. But when he considered the relationship between friend and foe and the effect of early destruction, he felt an indescribable feeling. Also, did this sort of forceful conversion have a chance of success? Luonin thought about the economic problem. He wanted to conduct a further experiment. This time, it was a mushmouth ape for a mushmouth ape. Perhaps he could make a slight change next time. Luonan's mind stirred as he pondered deeper. Someone's coming. The wraith sign in the clouds reacted almost at the same time as his thoughts. An incorporeal wave transmitted, and Yuan too received the order from below. He instantly transformed into a streak of bloody light and entered the wraith sign's gaping mouth. His form and shadow vanished. There was such an operation? Luo-Nen watched as Yuan too transformed into a bloody light and returned to the third level of the cave, fusing together with the stone statue. The mushed-mouth ape statue was affected by this, and its veins and lines gradually grew brighter. It gave off a feeling of flesh and blood being reborn. Luo-Nen didn't observe in detail because a thunderclap rang out 1,700 kilometers away in the area where Yuan Tu had transformed and reconstructed. Gong Qi's figure appeared from the clouds, drawing all of Luo-Nan's attention. Gong Qi's soul-body state was practically no different from a real person. He was even a bit younger than what was shown in the data. There was only a layer of green-gray light curling around him. It scattered like smoke, condensed like a wide robe, flickering indefinitely. Snake Tongue's figure wasn't by his side right now. Instead, Luo-Nan's soul cloak fluttered faintly in the surroundings. The fine waves of the polar domain and the changes of order on the molecular and atomic planes were linked together in an extremely ingenious manner. The cloud world was truly the friendliest environment for the soul cloak, which operated with the condensation ring. Water vapor was abundant, and the mental plane and the material world were interwoven like a labyrinth. Even the slightest ripple would be drowned in the surging airflow of the high altitude. Luo-Nan was at ease as he brazenly observed Gong Qi, but Gong Qi was completely unaware of this. This person carefully probed and searched within the clouds. Soon, he captured the remnant traces of Yuan Tu's flight path, and he chased after him. But the more he chased, the more grave and grim his overly young face became. Gong Qi only flew about halfway through the 1,700 kilometers before stopping. He frowned and thought. Luo-Nen indicated for the wraith sign to leap into the depths of the polar domain. He continued to observe and wait with the most cautious attitude. This sort of scene had occurred many times in the past week. Luo-Nen was testing the limits of Gong Qi's senses bit by bit. And up until now, this Deputy Secretary General, who had already stepped into extraordinary, had yet to receive any response worthy of Luo-Nan's vigilance. Luo-Nan was once worried that Gong Qi was putting on an act, but that he was actually setting up a trap in secret. But the result he obtained under his repeated attempts was the same from beginning to end. And during this cautious probing process, Luo-Nan discovered a very interesting way of doing things by Gong Qi. It was about time now. Luo-Nan used the hexa-ear to check the time in the real world. It was currently 10:50 in the morning, November 26th, Xia City time. After Gong Qi's pursuit was fruitless, he adjusted his breathing a bit and controlled his mood. Then his figure flashed, and there was a clap of thunder as he leaped into the depths of the void. He appeared again half a minute later, and he was 1,200 kilometers away. Gong Qi's soul body traversed a great distance of 5,000 kilometers in a row after flashing 3 times in this manner. This sort of method was even more inconceivable than Yuan Tu's 30 times the speed of sound. But the area where Gong Qi finally appeared was still within the range of Luo-Nan's soul cloak. Even though Luo-Nan had intercepted the vast majority of the results of the closed system's large production line in a week's time, The soul cloak continued to expand endlessly within the friendly environment of the cloud world. 5,000 kilometers was no problem at all. Gongqi never imagined that there would be someone who could firmly lock onto him and not leave him for even a moment under the continuous use of his soul teleportation ability. He just adjusted his breathing once more in the clouds, calming the exhaustion from his many teleportations. This continued for approximately 6 or 7 minutes before his figure flashed once more. He still used teleportation, but he only shifted about 400 kilometers. The margin of error was extremely small at this distance. After his figure flashed, Snake Tongue, who was draped in cloud muslin, was right behind him. Secretary General Gong. Snake Tongue bowed respectfully, but she maintained a subtle distance. Gongqi didn't care about this. He held his hands behind his back as he leisurely observed the clouds. Several seconds passed before he slowly turned around. He smiled and said, "I'm not late, right?" The Secretary General has always been punctual. It's fortunate that the Society didn't have any arrangements for me during this time. I just rely on my time to get off work. Oh, right now in Chan City. It's 5 in the afternoon. Really? Snake Tongue's face was hidden behind the cloud muslin. Her face couldn't be seen too clearly, but her sigh was soft and sweet-sounding. She didn't continue this topic. Instead, she changed the subject. "Secretary General, how are we going to search today? We're going to follow the same path as yesterday. How much of the trajectory determination of those 10 blood apes have been completed?" The blood ape Gongqi spoke of was the same as the mushed-mouth ape that Luonan spoke of. It was just that the name was different. Snake Tongue casually waved her hand through the clouds, quickly drawing a relatively detailed trajectory map. The zigzagging lines crisscrossed each other, dazzling the eyes. It was fortunate that Snake Tongue was able to reproduce this plaything, and Gongqi was able to look at it with extreme seriousness. "From today onwards, we'll go to this area." Gongqi began to make arrangements. "When I'm not here, you can continue to explore deeper. If you encounter any special restrictions, try using the restriction-breaking technique I taught you. If it doesn't work, wait for me to come up and make a decision." "Yes." Snake Tongue responded respectfully as before, and the two leaped into the depths of the clouds. Though they were still within the range of the soul cloak, Luo Nan was disinclined to pay attention to what happened next. Ever since he received Cat Eye's precise intelligence, he had only made one thing clear from his observations today. Gongqi was lying. Though Luo Nan didn't stare at the cloud world day and night, he could use the convenience of the Wraith sign to constantly pay attention to the situation here. Gongqi would appear within the range of the soul cloak every time he paid attention to the cloud world for the past 2 days. Though Gongqi frequently leaped into the depths within a range of several thousand kilometers, and he often separated from Snake Tongue, Luo Nan had never. Yes, he had never seen Gongqi leave the cloud world. According to Cat Eye's intelligence, Gongqi had been in closed-door training ever since he returned to headquarters. How could he go to work on time? There was no doubt that Gongqi was lying to Snake Tongue. Why? Luo Nan had a corresponding guess in his mind long ago, but he wasn't in a hurry to come to a conclusion. He knew that rashly coming to a conclusion about an extraordinary was often the beginning of death, even though Luo Nan had been madly sprinting along the path of death. Let's observe for a while more. Luo Nan needed an even more ideal opportunity, an opportunity that could consign Gongqi to eternal damnation. Chapter 495. Just a few days into December, a wave of cold air arrived unexpectedly. The temperature was 20 degrees below zero, and the harsh weather of snow turned Xia City into a city of ice and snow. The northern wind whistled outside the window, but it was as warm as spring within a certain library of Acumen College. The lighting was dim within the specially open workshop. A projection structure was spread out layer by layer on top of an enormous ring-shaped workstation. It painted the cheeks of the surrounding young men and women with a layer of color. It appeared grotesque and motley. The workstation was indeed very large, but there were 30 to 50 people gathered together. They were divided into inner and outer layers. The inner layer was close to the workstation, so their statuses were naturally a bit higher. They were currently engaged in an intense discussion, forming a buzzing sound. As for the outer layer, some people were standing on their tiptoes to stare. There were also some people who didn't care and simply chatted with each other. Of course, there was another type of person who was incompatible with the current environment. Luonan was one of them. He leaned against the corner of the wall and opened up the flexible e-ink screen. He casually drew on it with his hand. There was practically no sense of existence, and very few people paid attention to what he was doing. Luonan was happy to see this. He only recognized 2 or 3 people in this room. Shuelei, who was the closest to him, was outside the workstation. He relied on his tall and sturdy body to look down at the bustling scene. This powerful friend of his, who could easily kill a lion and a tiger, was breathing softly and softly. His heartbeat had dropped to below 20 beats per minute. However, the powerful blood energy surged and expanded within his blood vessels, muscles, and fascia. It formed a slight vibration that approached the infrasonic zone. It spread out on a level that ordinary people were unable to perceive. This heavy and condensed rhythm could be described in terms of timbre. It could be said to be the resonant ringing of bells and drums. It could be said to outshine others in this room, full of club members. This was a difference in the level of life. And on a level closer to reality, the sounds of words, low laughter, and breathing were disorderly and chaotic. The peaks and valleys of the sound waves collided and converged, creating a complex distortion. If one were to factor in semantics, it would undoubtedly paint a scene without any sense of beauty. Luonan, who was the recorder, couldn't help but shake his head. His hands never stopped, sketching lines and structures that grew more and more complex. Seeing that the newly created page was already out of shape, an even more directional sound wave entered Luonan's ear. Brother Nan. The word brother was said a bit vaguely. It was like a mixture of he and duh. It was the transition from Nanster to Brother Nan. In a situation where his age and age were higher, it was a bit hard for a young man like Tianqi to take the initiative to change the way he addressed Luonan. But this was Tianqi's decision. Tianqi. His name was the same as Gongqi's, but he was just a youth in heat who wished to use the mysticism arts to pick up girls. Even if he had all sorts of problems, he was still much cuter than the Deputy Secretary General. At this time, he moved close to Luonan's ear and whispered a reminder. Brother Nan, the performance of the group activities will all be recorded into the points. That's right. Luonan's current location was the collective activity location of the Mystic Arts Research Society's Arcana Deconstruction Group. The time had yet of the club, the club members of the club, and before. The club building as in as a and as in the building. The Club of the Mystic. And the Mystic Arts Research Club's original location had yet to be rented. It would take a certain amount of time to relocate and purchase all sorts of equipment. The club's relocation had yet to begin. But as a member of the Order Club, he and Shuelei merged into the Mystic Arts Research Club according to the school's principle of not one member missing. They began a brand new club career. Today was the second time Luonan and Shuelei joined the club. For the first time, the relevant person in charge gave them a few introductions. This time, they did what they needed to do. Luonan wasn't very sociable, but the former president, Lady Du Yong, broke the door and left. The new president, Blood Peony, Tang Yi, patted her, and followed her teacher to the wilderness to do research. The club was like a group of dragons without a leader for a short period of time. Everyone had their own plans. Perhaps this was the most important factor. Luonan had heard a certain sissy wail many times. If you want to be a hands-off boss, then why did you steal my position in the first place? In any case, Luonan needed some time to adapt to this new environment. Tianqi's flattery saved him quite a bit of effort. It was thanks to Tianqi's recommendation that Luonan and Shuelei weren't completely isolated from the start. At the very least, they had a few nodding acquaintances. Because of this, and because of Tianqi, Luonan treated Tianqi rather warmly. He didn't mind chatting a bit more with him. The group's topic is the restoration of the Eleusis apparatus. I'm actually quite interested in these things, but I don't know anything about them. I need to gather information. Luo Nan's willingness to respond made Tianqi breathe a sigh of relief. He hurriedly sat to the side and did his best to mock himself. Who knows anything about them? This is an antique from the 19th century BC. It's the legendary ancient Greek era. Its core stage is already a secret among secrets. It's already the 22nd century. Over 4,000 years have passed. What's left? Everyone pretends to understand when they don't. It's all right. Some people have interesting ideas. Luo Nan didn't speak courteous words. He had a whole new level of respect for this place after truly entering the Mystic Arts Research Society. Inside this society, aside from the rich second generation who took drugs and played around, all sorts of activities were carried out in a rather orderly manner. They were quite deep. For instance, the apparatus deconstruction group, which Luo Nan participated in. They carried out research targeting the secret rituals of the myths and legends of the ancient civilization. They attempted to use the more modern concepts of mystic arts to deconstruct them. Things like the descent of gods and blessings sounded quite absurd. But if these concepts were put in a different way and said to be the mutual interference of the mental and the material, the interference of mental power, wouldn't it be linked to supernatural powers in an instant? Not only was the train of thought interesting, but the configurations of the magical array and the like looked quite professional. Luo Nan really couldn't find any problems with it, given his second-hand attainments in the mystic arts. Tianqi wanted to express his concern. Brother Nan, after winter break ends, you'll be assigned to a specialized laboratory. The credit grading is very important. Luo Nan smiled. I've already participated in the initial construction of the Star of David structure in today's homework. 2 of my suggestions have been adopted. I've finished half a credit for this semester. Even though he found a friend of the society to cheat. Oh, that's right. Tianqi was suddenly enlightened. He never thought that Luo Nan would cheat. From his perspective, the former president, Du Yong, had anxiously hoped that Luo Nan would dispel his doubts back at Aurora Cloud City, given his attainments in the mystic arts. One could well imagine Luo Nan's level in this field. He was just about to say a few words of flattery when he heard Luo Nan say, "You should go to Gear after winter break. Other people don't have a say in whether or not there's a specialized laboratory there." Tianqi instinctively shrunk his neck back. It must be said that Tianqi's first impression of Luo Nan was quite average. But as his familiarity with Luo Nan deepened, especially when he went to Aurora Cloud City that day, his psychological position was completely subverted. He had been a bystander the entire time that day, but he had seen Luo Nan's powerful circle of friends and Luo Nan's core position in his circle of friends. There was no need to talk about the matter with Du Yong. The top silk pants, Xie, Junping, and Hu Huaying were simply lackeys in front of Luo Nan. There was also his older cousin Tianqi, who he had always viewed as his greatest support in the school. She had torn apart all pretenses with the vice president of the student council, Chen Weiqian, just because of a few words from Luo Nan. If such a person with energy really wanted to go head-to-head against the Mystic Arts Research Society, no matter the outcome, it would be a fight between immortals. He, a mortal, might not even have the qualifications to stand on the side and cheer for Luo Nan. Tianqi was a bit stunned for a time when he thought about the conflict that might occur in the future. Luo Nan didn't care about him. Most of Luo Nan's energy had been focused on collecting and analyzing the sound plane when he was chatting with Luo Nan. He had been scribbling and drawing on the flexible e-ink screen all this time, recording his insights. Tianqi was silent for a long time. He was a bit embarrassed. He subconsciously extended his head to sweep a few glances upwards. He saw the drawing interface, and his gaze became a bit unfocused. Could it be that his IQ was low? How come he was completely unable to see the order within? Those chaotic lines and the randomly drawn symbols were simply an enormous mockery of human reason. Luo Nan knew that Tianqi was dizzy, but he had no intention of explaining. Whether it was chatting or silence, Luo Nan never forgot where his mental energy should be directed from beginning to end. Ever since Luo, Nan set the basic principle of observing and waiting for Gongqi in the cloud world, Luo Nan gradually calmed his mind. He did more practical things while maintaining his observation. In the beginning, he was quite worried that Gongqi would suddenly make a breakthrough in a moment of carelessness. Gongqi would see through the truth of the cloud world, and Luo Nan would be powerless to do anything but watch helplessly. But as time passed, his restless thoughts gradually settled. His gaze that looked towards the cloud world grew calmer and calmer. And the target of Luo Nan's observation became more and more annoyed and impatient from day-to-day busyness and pretentiousness, especially when Luo Nan was alone. There were already situations where Luo Nan was venting his anger, and it was happening more and more frequently. It was like Luo Nan was watching a trapped beast that had fallen into a trap. Even though Luo Nan didn't have any injuries, Luo Nan could only run in circles in this narrow space. Luo Nan struggled in front of insurmountable obstacles until the toxins of his negative emotions seeped in layer by layer, corroding his reason and willpower. Of course, Gongqi's negative emotions were also repetitive. In any case, Gongqi was one of the top characters in the world. He knew how to regulate his emotions, restore his reason, and maintain his state. This sort of repetitiveness would sometimes cause Luo Nan to feel a sense of defeat, as if all his previous efforts had been wasted. But it was this sort of repetitiveness that forced Luo Nan to get used to it. It forced him to hone his patience. It made him gradually understand that the twists and turns of events were the norm. He even learned a few methods of regulation from Gongqi. He also understood how to grasp his own rhythm. He used a solid and orderly attitude to grind away the burrs in his mind bit by bit. He grinded away the noise of emotions that could affect his judgment. A dozen days passed in the blink of an eye. Luo Nan began to feel that his state was becoming better and better. He was able to do things and cultivate steadily, and he was able to maintain sensitivity and vigilance towards his observation target at all times. He was firm and keen, like a treasured sword that had been tempered to the point of sharpness and toughness. Yet he hid it within the sheath. He didn't forget to maintain it meticulously, waiting for the moment of blood sacrifice. Hiss! The breath that Luo Nan exhaled from his mouth and nose seemed to carry the howl of a golden blade cleaving through the wind. It was a different image from all the living beings around him. Chapter 496. Luo Nan was an expert in mental senses. The integration and reconstruction of the external information structure was nothing to him. He was actually more concerned about the situation within his body. Right now, his 2 kidneys were trembling and heating up. Then his heart, liver, spleen, and lungs responded. Energy interweaved like a net and densely covered his entire body. It was clear that his 9 orifices and 6 roots internal cultivation technique had reached a critical juncture. Luo Nan took 2 deep breaths and adapted to his current state. He then sent a signal to Shuelei. Shuelei heard the signal and hurriedly retreated from the crowd. Luo Nan put away his digital pen and swept his eyes over the messy drawing page. He saved and exited. He frowned as soon as he exited to the starting interface. A woman's voice came through a second later. "You must be Junior Nan. I finally get to see you in person." Tianqi saw the newcomer and hurriedly got up to greet her, Senior Sister Fei. He had a bad feeling in his heart. This Senior Sister Fei was a relatively famous second-generation member of the society. She was the type that brought money into the group. She was willful and had quite an influence. Most importantly, Huang Bingjin, the society officer who had a conflict with Luo Nan and was still being treated in the hospital, belonged to her branch. Strictly speaking, there was an old grudge between the two. Some time ago, there were quite a few voices in the society that wanted to teach Luo Nan a lesson. Could it be that they were here? Tianqi was worried about how to remind Luo Nan, but he had to do an introduction first. "Brother Nan, this is Senior Sister Fei Jin. She's the general manager of the society's public relations department." He intentionally emphasized the word general manager in hopes of attracting Luo Nan's attention. Unfortunately, his careful plan was completely wasted. How could Luo Nan remember the name and position of a random soldier who had a grudge against him a month or two ago. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Under the dim lighting of the workshop, only a faint outline of Fei Jin's appearance could be seen. She could be considered beautiful and upright. Luo had no interest in delving into the minute details. He just nodded and continued to pack up. Fei Jin walked forward with a giggle and let out a rather exaggerated sigh. Wow, Junior Nan, I've heard of your name for a long time. I saw your video too. You're really super handsome. Junior, are you practicing martial arts? Is there really such a thing as internal strength? Can you teach me? Under Tianqi's dumbfounded expression, Fei Jin's attitude was simply the attitude of a fan facing a celebrity. She put her palms together and bowed slightly, giving off the feeling of a young lady. Tianqi had never seen Fei Jin like this before. He was a little confused and asked subconsciously, "Video? The one that's very popular on the campus forum." Fei Jin really didn't regard Luo Nan as an outsider. She directly sat on the other side of Luo Nan and leaned her body over. She naturally pressed half of her ample body against Luo Nan's elbow. Her hand slid across the flexible e-ink screen to carry out operations. Only then did he say hello. "I left a message on it. You'll know when you open it. Wow, there's so few apps on it. What's this? You haven't finished downloading?" Fei Jin was a little curious. She tapped on the gray icon on the top half of the screen with her black-painted fingernail. Naturally, there was no response. Luo Nan's eyes narrowed. He extended his hand and pushed Fei Jin's fingers away. "There's no need to look anymore. I know what's going on." The cause of the matter was the day of the Municipal Plaza incident. Luo Nan lived in Ocean Sky Cloud City. He woke up early and went to school to jog and exercise. He exhaled like an arrow, and the hot air he exhaled shot far away. The visual effect was top-notch. It was unknown which busybody took a picture of it at the time and posted it on the school forum. It stirred up quite a bit of popularity. Tianqi, this fellow, lost his mind when he met a woman. He forgot that he was the one who brought up this video during the last club activity. He bragged in a small circle that Luo Nan and Xue Lei were Qigong experts in Eastern mysticism. Luo Nan closed his notebook and stood up. Tianqi guessed that Luo Nan was unhappy. It was as if his butt was pricked by needles. He jumped up in an instant. On the other side, Fei Jin got up quite quickly. She didn't seem to mind Luo Nan's cold and hard actions at all. She even hooked on the crook of Luo Nan's arm. She looked quite clingy. "Junior, let's add each other as friends. Let's keep in touch in the future." Xue Lei had already walked up to them at this time. He sized up the situation with curiosity. Luo Nan glanced at his elbow and saw Fei Jin's fingers pressed against it. She gently and slowly circled it. It was as if she was doing some small movements inadvertently. He didn't deliberately shake her off. He just said, "I gotten to know Senior Sister today. If we meet again in the future, I'll take this factor into consideration." Fei Jin was a bit startled. She raised her head and met Luo Nan's cold and clear gaze. Her heart stirred and her fingers froze. She didn't continue her small movements. It was at this time that their wristbands lit up at the same time. This wasn't the mechanical response of adding each other as friends. Though the brands and models of their wristbands were different, a dial-like interface of garbled code appeared on the floating virtual screen. Broken symbols shuttled back and forth, ultimately piecing together to form a classic DNA double helix structure. Then their wristbands vibrated, indicating that they had received a message. Luo Nan didn't react at all. He glanced at his wristband and went straight ahead. He soon left Fei Jin behind. Fei Jin didn't chase after him, but her originally stiff expression softened and returned to spring. Her lips hooked into a subtle curve. Brother Nan. Tianqi chased after Luo Nan with quick steps. A layer of sweat had piled up on his forehead. Luo Nan didn't feel like bickering with him. He just said, "Help me ask for a leave. Leicester's too." "Oh, okay. Tianqi could only stop and watch as Luo Nan and Xue Lei walked out side by side. "Who's that guy? He doesn't have any skills. Did he just come to strike up a conversation?" Xue Lei asked in a low voice as they walked along the library corridor. "He should be the representative of the funds behind the Mystic Arts Research Society. small shareholders. Their ratio isn't high. I've seen them in the information before. I have a bit of an impression. Luo Nen had done his homework after the ownership of gear was confirmed. Otherwise, he wouldn't have deliberately displayed a cold and hard attitude today. The conflict between him and the investors of the Mystic Arts Research Society would erupt sooner or later regarding the issue of gear. From the looks of things, it was better to erupt sooner rather than later. He didn't mind making his attitude clear early on. However, the synchronized message from the two wristbands was unexpected. The DNA double helix was the brand logo of a high-end event. It was recommended by Mingtang Culture's Artist Department's manager Shah. The organizer of the party would send out a message every few days. On one hand, it was a countdown reminder. On the other hand, it would probe the participants and unearth the hobbies of their customers. Luo Nan was a bit curious about the so-called high-end corrupted party, but he wasn't completely interested in it. He only kept this clue in mind that it might involve the mutant infection and even that mysterious Luo Yuan. Fei Jin was also an invited customer. It wasn't strange in itself. It was more or less a coincidence that they were together. Luo Nan didn't spend too much effort on this. Fei Jin's way of doing things couldn't be considered excessive. It could only be said that she was good at using her natural capital. But unfortunately, she chose a very bad time. Luo Nan and Shui Lei took the elevator to the first floor of the library. Luo Nan didn't speak anymore. His listening observation in the workshop suddenly became clear, indicating that the heat of his ear orifice had reached perfection. Then his kidney energy flowed, and the vital energy of his 5 viscera resonated. This proved that his cultivation of the 9 orifices and 6 roots technique had entered a critical stage. Shuile was close. He could faintly sense something, so he shut his mouth early on. At the same time, he notified Qin Ikuan and Gouda, who were on standby outside the building. Luo Nen exited the library with a few steps. He stepped into the gloomy sky that still had sporadic flying snow. The cold air of -20 degrees pressed in layer by layer. But the most important thing was the enormous amount of information and stimulation that surged over at this moment. Color, shape, temperature, sound, smell, and the layout of space were piled up layer by layer. They were reorganized over and over again. This external environment forced Luo Nan to make a corresponding response. At the same time, he differentiated between the meaningfulness of his response and the meaningfulness of it. He remolded his own instincts. Luo Nan's unique attainments in mental senses helped Luo Nan greatly in this regard. He was very clear on the judgment of information, the direction, and the technique of integration. He practically didn't need to take a detour, and he was able to put more mental energy into the transformation of his fleshly body. The 9 orifices and 6 roots technique was established on the basis of classical Eastern philosophy. It had always viewed cultivation as an interconnected whole. Luo Nan's ear orifice was perfected, and his kidney energy was budding. His entire body's essence, energy, and bone marrow all sensed it. It vibrated in a continuous manner, causing the entire skeleton structure of his entire body to become smooth. It also stimulated the heart, liver, spleen, lungs, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, tendons, bones, meridians, skin, flesh, hair, and so on. Layer by layer, they resonated, penetrated, and covered. This was the integration and understanding of a human body structure. From Luo Nan's perspective, this was like a pair of incorporeal hands of creation. It controlled all the perceptible and measurable particles of matter. It piled up and fused together to form a grand and precise architectural structure. The corresponding structure guided energy and information from low to high. It climbed step by step. First, the foundation of matter was established. Then, the carrier of life was constructed. Then, the guidance was further refined to form a precise form for processing information. From the most basic reactions, the most basic emotions, to relatively clear thoughts and train of thought, all the way to high-level thoughts and emotions. Finally, Luo Nan took a step into the grand palace of the mind. The process of déjà vu corresponded with Luo Nan's feelings and awareness at all times. It allowed him to possess a clearer understanding. That's right. This was a grand building constructed from the material plane that led to the mental plane of nothingness. It was rooted in the fleshly body, yet it transcended above it. It was the Tower of Babel that connected the mental and the material. It was Mount Bujo that connected the limits of man and heaven. Though it didn't break away from Luo Nan's established order framework, it was just a demonstration of its reconstruction. It allowed the coupling relationship between Luo Nan's God gear and body gear to cut into a deeper plane. Rays of light rushed up from the bottom of the ice-cold and silent sea of God gear. The mental interfered with the material, and the material interfered with the mental. From the perspective of classical philosophy, yin and yang rubbed against each other. Clear and turbid intersected, triggering a penetrating attack of electricity. Brilliant electrical fire spread throughout every corner of the God gear and body gear structure. Under the effect of this power, the life and death orifices of the front and back were instantly connected. The interior of the body was a complete mess. Mountains and rocks were dense, and rivers flowed everywhere. It seemed contradictory, but it was the convergence and linking of different dimensional levels. Due to the expansion of the dimensional levels, the corresponding area of effect was naturally no longer limited by the basic structure of the body and soul. Instead, it naturally expanded outwards, causing incorporeal ripples to ripple in the surrounding void. Luo Nan's own logic, his own framework, formed a slight distortion towards the external world. Luo Nan stopped his steps in shock. He had unwittingly walked to the surface of a bridge. Beneath his feet was the river that cut through the forest that divided the north and south shores of the campus. Shuele and the other two took a step forward in unison. "What's wrong?" "Oh, I think I've awakened." It just so happened that a white-headed duck, a characteristic resident bird of the wetland jungle, swayed to the riverside. Perhaps it was confused by the floating snow, but it stepped onto the frozen surface of the lake. It was caught off guard and squawked. Chapter 497. Sprinkle flowers to congratulate a certain weakling for finally getting rid of his substitute hat and officially entering the 70,000-strong group. When are you going to hold a feast? Everyone will congratulate you. I will catch a fish as a gift, a congratulatory message from the bottom of the sea. Looking at this momentum, the raiding companies of the inner world are going to explode. The military intelligence department will probably use your face as a target to throw darts at. Do you want me to take a few stacks of paper talismans from Old Gao? Honest arts and crafts store owner. I think President Ouyang is really going to explode. His self-logic theory will definitely need a revised version. The biology team of the society has been calling me to work overtime every day for the past 2 days. I can't even write my own thesis. Resentful medical worker. A psychic awakening in the fleshly mode. This is actually a wrong path. He might go berserk in the next moment, vomit blood, and die. Pessimistic believer. Damn, what's wrong with fleshly mode? Nanster, why don't you come to the wilderness? You don't have to go far. Let's do some assault training and consolidate. Former Special Forces soldier entering annual training. The main thing is how much my combat strength has increased. Everything else is meaningless. I could be a sparring partner, a low-key assassin. Wrong. Everything is a financial problem. The most important thing is how much my net worth has increased. Right now, the number of laboratories that want to find Boss Luo to breed has increased to 12. This is just the number of applications. I think that just by selling sperm, the big guy at Ocean Sky Cloud City would be able to change ownership. Erudite, doghead advisor. Luo Nan was forcefully pulled into a temporary discussion group on the Psychic Wave Network. This group included practically all the members of the society he knew. In a certain sense, everyone's enthusiasm was high. Congratulatory messages flew in like snowflakes. It was just that in the end, the direction was a bit off. Luo Nan rolled his eyes in response. He simply said, "I'm in class. It's my treat later." Then he set the discussion group's information to receive, but not remind mode. Then he raised his head and continued to seriously watch Gym Master Show, right, with Shuele. Right now, the environment he was in was quite odd. It was a -20-degree snowy day, but the front and back windows of the entire room were still open. There was no heating, air conditioning, or other heating facilities. The temperature inside and outside was practically the same. Snowflakes drifted in, accumulating a thin layer on the windowsill and the floor. Although he was meeting Dojo Master Shio, this was no longer the Divine Dojo. It was just a single apartment. The floor area was only 50 square meters, but since Gym Master Shio didn't use much furniture and daily necessities, most of them were stuffed into the storage room downstairs. Thus, the room didn't seem crowded and even felt a little spacious. In the study, there was only a table and a chair. There were some paper books piled up in the corner. Brush, ink, paper, and inkstone were all available on the table. The paperweight was pressed against the top of the Xian paper, but when the air blew past, the edge of the paper still trembled slightly. But no matter what, wherever the tip of the brush landed, the surface of the paper was smooth and stable. The ink flowed, and in one breath, 32 words were written. The words read, "Heaven and earth set their positions, yin and yang of the universe. Changes are not permanent. Comings and goings are impermanent. Transforming can and Li was the Tao discipline framework. God knows how to transform, and virtue matches the heavens." While writing, Gym Master Shio had casually explained that the general meaning of this passage was, there's a world inside the body, and there's another world outside the body. The two are ever-changing, and cultivators must grasp the core principles. Grasping order from the inside to the outside, connecting heaven and man. Only then can one's virtue match heaven and earth, and one's Tao surpass the ages. The word was Ji-gang. Luo Nin deeply believed in this. Discipline framework was order. It was efficiency. It was format. After his awakening, his body and soul interfered, and the level of dimensions expanded. The resources he grasped increased at an astonishing rate. His precision increased by a large margin under the crisscrossing senses of multiple dimensions and angles. Not to mention the external world, Luo Nin could already feel the subtle deformations of his nerve cell membranes when he focused his attention. The effects on the nerve endings led to a certain flow of bioelectricity and even the entire process of forming specific nerve impulses. If a single nerve was like this, then the corresponding amount of information could be imagined when the entire nervous system was calculated. Expanding from the details, the complex structure of the human body was involved. On the cellular level, the human body was filled with traces of assembly. On the microscopic level, every cell was relatively independent, yet they were exquisitely assembled together. They endlessly produced the basic source substance needed for life, as well as the energy to sustain life. On a larger scale, the 5 viscera and 6 bowels, the fascia, the flesh, and the blood were all components of the human body system. They supplied energy, conducted energy, performed work, and realized various functions of the human body. If one wanted to completely control every detail of such a complex and precise system, the human brain would have to be replaced with a supercomputer. Only then would one need to have an extraordinarily powerful energy and heat dissipation system. Fortunately, humans had already formed a set of relatively perfect basic information processing methods during the long process of evolution. It was enough to deal with the majority of situations in normal life. Controlling resources and corresponding processing methods combined together was a type of cell format. It was just that it was a bit fuzzy and low-end. But for ability users and awakened ones, they needed to have more efficient, more concise, more precise, and more targeted choices in order to control power that far exceeded that of ordinary people to reach a deeper level and to even gain something from the vast heaven and earth. Your Gestalt, Shui Lei's rune seed, the military's format of fire. Actually, all ability users cultivate and apply their usual methods. They're all discipline framework. They're all formats. It's just that there's a distinction between roughness and exquisiteness. There's a distinction between a small path and a great path. Gym Master Shio washed away the ink on his brush and returned it to its original position on the rack. His words were like ink that had been moistened by the brush wash, fading into nothingness. All discipline framework formats need to be filled with details and laws. Otherwise, it would just be talking about the metaphysical. It sounds right, but it's actually irrelevant. On this point, I won't deny that the accumulation of the school of martial arts is still shallow. There are too many intuition experiences and philosophical speculations. In actual development, it is already far inferior to the archetype format, which has absorbed relevant experience and pushed forward with the power of the entire world. He played down the field that his school excelled in. Shuelei's mouth moved in response to this, but he didn't say anything in the end. Luo Nan's expression was calm as he pondered in detail. Gym Master Xiao faced Luo Nan. There's nothing much to teach you now that you've reached the awakened stage. After all, you still walk the path of the mental side. You don't need to engage in close combat with others. I just want to remind you that humanity's many years of research have yielded very abundant results. Building a car behind closed doors is the most foolish course of action. In this day and age, even if everyone works together, there will still be moats that cannot be filled, let alone others. Shuelei needs to remember this point as well. Luo Nan and Shuelei responded in unison. However, Luo Nan immediately said, "Gym Master, please spur me on from time to time in my cultivation from now on. I've been thinking about the problem of the format for the past 2 days. There are some unreliable ideas that I need Gym Master to review." Gym Master Xiao shook his head. "You won't let me have peace? I won't be able to control you for a few days." The two youths looked at each other. Shuelei raised his eyebrows at Luo Nan. His expression was nervous and fretful. Luo Nan knew what was going on. As the winter solstice approached, the arranged battle between the Thunder Falcon Martial School's Duan Hong and Gym Master Xiao was imminent. Let's not talk about Duan Hong's strength. Let's not talk about Duan Hong's collusion with the military. Gym Master Xiao had to move, sit idly, practice calligraphy. Nothing else had been prepared. There was only half a month left until December 22nd. Shuelei grew more and more impatient the closer the time came. Luo Nan didn't understand Gym Master Xiao's plans at all, but he had a bad feeling. In the past, he couldn't see through Gym Master Xiao, so he didn't dare to forcefully probe him. After his awakening, Shuelei instigated him to take advantage of the demonstration to roughly probe Gym Master Xiao. Gym Master Xiao's situation was terrible. The state of Gym Master Xiao's body was a complete mess. It was as if there was an atomic furnace that had gone out of control within his body. It constantly emitted catastrophic pulses, destroying everything in its surroundings. But before the pulses truly spread out of his body, they would magically dissolve one by one, not revealing themselves. If there was anything, it would just be an excessively high body temperature. Therefore, the windows of this apartment were still open during the frigid winter. Gym Master Xiao's exceedingly powerful foundation was manifested by such a method of dispelling. But the damage had already been done. The operating mechanism of his internal organs had been severely damaged, and it even touched upon the more fundamental genetic plane. It was something that Luo Nan could no longer understand. Was Gym Master Xiao strong? He was definitely strong. Even now, he still contained a terrifying power. But could he fight? Luo Nan didn't dare to think about it. From his perspective, Gym Master Xiao's internal organs might disintegrate, and his body would be engulfed by internal fire if he made a slightly excessive move in his current terrible state. How did things reach this stage? Since things had reached this stage, Gym Master Xiao shouldn't accept the arranged battle. Luo Nan had already discussed this with Shuelei. They had to dispel Gym Master Shue's thoughts of accepting the challenge no matter what. They could change the format. It could be a disciple fight, a group fight, or even a gym challenge. In any case, either Gym Master Xiao wouldn't accept the challenge, or the Gym Master would have to do the hard work. It didn't matter if Gym Master Xiao won or lost. The two exchanged glances a few times. They wanted to take the opportunity to discuss this topic, but they never expected that Gym Master Xiao would coincidentally stop at the beginning. He still spoke to Luo Nan. "You said before that your grandfather left behind the 16 words formula. It's intricate and concise. and it's also a method of breathing and expelling. I've always been curious. Can you write it down for me to see? Okay. Luo Nen couldn't find a reason to refuse. He had just responded when Gym Master Xiao took a weasel bristle from the brush rack. He personally dipped it in ink and handed it to Luo Nan. Shuai Lei changed the paper. Which youngster of today had ever practiced calligraphy? Even though the weasel bristle was tough and easy to write with, Luo Nan relied completely on his stable wrist techniques to forcefully draw. Though it wasn't to the point of staggering, it lacked the beauty of a turning point. He didn't even know how to use ink. The 16 words were either stiff like firewood or dull and sluggish. It was too horrible to look at. Gym Master Xiao didn't care. He straightened the writing on the Xian paper and placed it before his eyes for a careful look. He didn't raise his head in the middle. He extended a hand and asked Luo Nan for the weasel bristle. He circled the fourth word of the second section. Then he wrote it again next to Luo Nan's ugly word. The word was Chapter 498. Gym Master Xiao raised his brush and wrote the word furnace, but when he opened his mouth, the first word he mentioned was prison. I'm guessing that the first word, prison, is perhaps the reason why you cultivate on the mental side. I'm not proficient in mental side cultivation, but I can feel that your soul strength possesses an extraordinary binding power. It's never wrong to spend more effort in this direction when cultivating. Thank you for the pointers, Gym Master. Luo Nan was very impressed by the word binding power that Gym Master Xiao pointed out. This truly pointed out the typical characteristics of his soul strength. This was something he had been thinking about ever since he awakened yesterday. However, he had too many thoughts, so Gym Master Xiao's words were much clearer and more precise. Gym Master Xiao shook his head slightly. I'm just speaking thoughtlessly. After all, I'm still an outsider. You need to know what you're doing. However, I have to say that the word furnace is quite exquisite. He drew a circle around the word furnace in his own name. The original meaning of a furnace is an appliance used to store fire. It also has the meaning of smelting and cooking. When it comes to cultivation, there are many teachings on the foundation. It is also said to change the quality and nature to refine the essence. This is the fundamental meaning that cultivators cannot avoid. He paused for a moment, then said softly, "This is also the starting point of the great path to heaven." Luo Nan and Shuai Lei looked at each other. Gym Master Xiao used to give lessons in the past. There was no lack of exaggerations within. Most of them were rhetorical expressions, so that they could remember them clearly. However, it seemed a bit abrupt to speak of the great path to heaven in plain language. Shuai Lei couldn't help but confirm, "The great path to heaven?" Gym Master Xiao tossed his brush into the brush washer and watched the ink spread a second time. It's the same furnace. Firewood stoves, coal stoves, steam engines, atomic furnaces, and fusion reactors are all different. Can't one reach the heavens by ascending these steps? Shuai Lei sweated a bit. If it's a reactor, what's the difference between the extraordinaries that your society speaks of and a nuclear reactor? How can a human be able to operate energy of such a level? Not to mention that these people are perpetually youthful, rejuvenated, have thoughts that span 10,000 miles, can pierce through the void, and so on. A mere reactor may not be able to catch up. Gym Master Xiao's hoarse voice somehow carried a sonorous tone. The present world is a flourishing age for cultivators. There are feasible, verifiable, and verifiable facts. This is enough to prove that there are no problems with our train of thought. There are no problems with our principles. There are just a few operational details. We just lack the operational details to realize them. We need time, energy, and the details need to be accumulated. Luonan stared at Gym Master Xiao in a daze as he listened to Gym Master Xiao speak. Luonan had a faint feeling that Gym Master Xiao's words were not imparting anything. Instead, Gym Master Xiao was narrating a fact that had already happened. The ink had melted in the brush. Luo Master Brush was Master Brush. Gym Master Brush. Master's Brush Master. After awakening, the path of imparting martial arts has actually already reached the pinnacle. It's just that the natural environment has changed, and a portion of people can still rely on their innate talents and borrow the power of the world to take a step further. The current generation's research on burners hasn't raised the upper limit. It's just that the conditions for breaking through the barriers between heaven and man have been greatly relaxed. Of course, they're still researching and still making progress. As for the smaller number of so-called transcendents, they seem to have taken another step forward. However, if they were asked to explain clearly how they got out and what they should do next, perhaps more than half of the 10 would not know the truth, and there were even a few who did not know what to say. Everyone can speak the truth, but the details are the most terrifying barriers, causing people to break their heads and bleed. Haha, if there's really someone who's able to see through the profundities and subtleties within, then set up the steps for this path to ascend to the heavens, and use it as a guide, then it'll naturally be boundless and incomparable, just like the ancient Swearin or Prometheus who stole the heavenly fire. Ha ha! It had been a long time since he had spoken so much. Toward the end, Dojo Master Shio was out of breath and coughed. His face was red, and even his neck was red. However, there was a smile within the coughing, a smile that caused Luo Nan and Shui Lei to be both worried and perplexed. Luo Nan never imagined that there would be someone like Jim Master Shio, who casually evaluated extraordinaries. Moreover, his words were filled with disdain. Disregarding everything else, just this arrogance was rare in this world, and it made people feel that his words were very reasonable. Luo Nan really wanted to hear more relevant information, but looking at Jim Master Shio's state, the atomic furnace that had gone out of control within his body was becoming more and more intense. It actually had the potential to trigger an old problem. How could Luo Nan dare to trouble Jim Master Shio? He gave Shui Lei a meaningful glance, telling him to stay here and take care of Jim Master Shio. Jim Master Shio didn't urge Luo Nan to stay. He just said to Luo Nan after catching his breath, "You don't need to worry about these things right now. The time for your potential to naturally be unearthed has yet to pass. It's more realistic to ponder over some application methods. As for the matter of the furnace, it won't be too late to slowly research it after your potential has been fully unearthed and you can't find a path forward." Luo Nan mumbled his acknowledgement and immediately excused himself. Jim Master Shio suddenly spoke just as he was about to leave the study. "Did you guys take the dynamo core from the Tai Chi ball?" Shui Lei was a bit embarrassed. He shot a glance at Luo Nan and said hurriedly, "Yeah, I took it to repair. It's about to be fixed." Luo Nan shuddered. He turned his head to look at Jim Master Shio. "Jim Master, do you know that it's the dynamo core?" Jim Master Shio didn't give a direct answer. He just said, "When I came back alone, I only brought this one souvenir. Since it's a souvenir, it doesn't matter if it's repaired or not. It was originally a defective product, just like us right now. Go get it." "Us right now?" Shui Lei gave Luo Nan a meaningful glance at this time, but Luo Nan didn't pay attention to it. His mind was surging with an endless tide. He used to believe that Jim Master Shio was a great martial arts imparter hidden in the city. It was only today that he found out that Jim Master Shio had a considerable understanding of the inner world, of burners, and even of a secret object like the dynamo core. Why was this so? Luo Nan didn't care about other things, but when it came to the dynamo core, this strange creation that was inextricably linked to his parents, it was impossible for him to ignore it. Luo Nan's thoughts were a mess, and he simply stood at the door in a daze. But at this time, his wristband received a call, waking him up. Jim Master Shio saw this and indicated that he could leave. Jim Master Shio looked down at the ugly character Luo Nan had written. He had no intention of speaking. Luo Nan was conflicted for a moment, but in the end, his respect for Jim Master Shio prevailed. He slowly turned around. At the same time, he lowered his head to look at the caller ID. It was Xie Junping. Luo Nan was just about to answer when he suddenly heard a voice. "Luo Nan." Jim Master Shio rarely called Luo Nan by his name ever since they met. Luo Nan was stunned for a moment. He hurriedly ended the call and turned around. Jim Master Shio didn't even raise his head. He spoke in a dull voice. You have a good grandfather. He opened up a vast space for you. You can't let him down. Yes. Thank you, Gym Master. Gym Master Shio really didn't speak anymore. He just stood there like a statue carved from withered wood. Shuele remained in the apartment, observing Gym Master Shio's state. Luo Nin went out alone. He was still a bit absent-minded when Xie Junping called him again. Where are you? Why aren't you picking up? I just left the Gym Master's house. Oh, you're cultivating. Then you're still in the Riverwu district. You haven't forgotten what day it is today, have you? I remember. Isn't your initiation ceremony at night? What time is it right now? Hee. Are you driving? I'm driving. Xie Junping's tone told Luo Nin that it wasn't a good thing. But Luo Nin had bodyguards following him at all times. He had just left the house, and Qin Yikuan was already following him. It would undoubtedly be the worst joke to say that he didn't drive. Driving is fine. I'll let you run some errands. We have a particularly lively kid here, Di Weiwu. You know his adoptive father. Hello? Hello? What's wrong? Did the signal get cut off? No, I'm listening. Luo Nin was just a bit stupefied by the coincidence. They were just talking about the dynamo core, and now Xie Junping was suddenly talking about a person closely related to it. Was Xia City evil? Di Weiwu's adoptive father. Yes, worker Zhai. I know. Xie Junping coughed. It's very simple. Worker Zhai will be attending the ceremony tonight, but he's working overtime on the weekend, so he can't come. Since you guys know each other, you might as well bring him back along the way. Bringing him back isn't a problem, but this can't be considered along the way. Worker Zhai's cross-border electronic city was located in the Xiqing district. Xie Junping's initiation ceremony was held in the Forestwall District's orphanage, and the Riverwu district just happened to be in between. If Luo Nan wanted to bring someone along, he would first have to walk back. If this could be considered along the way, then what about around the corner? Xie Junping continued to chuckle. I understand. It's just that worker Zhai is too busy today. That kid Weiwu came up with a rotten idea. He wants you to go and get a high-level account. Go out into the field and pull his father out. I'll pay for the middle fees. That's right. However, Luo Nan felt that this was more like the will of heaven. Luo Nan and his party arrived at the cross-border electronic city approximately 20 minutes later. It was the weekend, and this place was quite crowded. Business was bursting. While Luo Nan was in the car, he had already asked for the exclusive service of a designated maintenance technician. When he entered the maintenance hall, worker Zhai, who was busy at the open maintenance platform, immediately received the news. He raised his head and gazed into the distance. He saw Luo Nan and the others and made a wait a moment gesture through the air. Soon, a beautiful maintenance consultant walked over with quick steps. Hello, Mr. Luo. Your exclusive service has been accepted. Worker Zhai still has some unfinished work to do. He invites you to wait a moment in the independent maintenance room. Luo Nan was already a frequent customer of the cross-border electronic city, and he had been looking for worker Zhai all this time. The maintenance consultant had long since memorized Luo Nan's appearance. Her smile was like a flower. Luo Nan made an okay gesture toward the open maintenance platform and followed the maintenance consultant into maintenance room 245. Qin Yikuan accompanied him by his side, and God stood guard outside. Ever since Luo Nan began learning engineering and mechanical design from worker Zhai, he had come to this worker Zhai's exclusive maintenance room more than once. He had personally operated many of the equipment inside. In this room, he possessed authority second only to the super administrator of the electronic city and worker Zhai. Though the space was cramped, it was very intimate. After entering, he took the initiative to be the host. He opened the beverage box and delivered purified water to Qin Yikuan and God, who stood outside the door. Then it was time to wait. Luo Nan was never afraid of having nothing to do here. He still had a few unfinished practical assignments assigned by worker Zhai. There was even a semi-finished chip that worker Zhai had left behind. However, Luo Nan had come today not only to complete Xie Junping's request, but he also had an even more pressing matter to deal with. Chapter 499. Luo Nan sat cross-legged in the center of the spacious hall. He sensed that there was an enormous space of over 10,000 square meters without any support. It was completely transparent. Surrounding him were slowly rotating structural diagrams. Concise lines and symbols were used to indicate the internal structure and function of the machine, as well as the relationship between the various components. This spacious area was a virtual space set up on the psychic wave network through the hexa-year. Aside from a form that could be seen and felt, a portion of the supercomputing resources of the Xia City branch was borrowed to conduct a certain scale of analysis and calculation. There is no such thing as a free lunch in this world. This computing space was charged based on the amount of supercomputing resources borrowed. The payment was extremely precious honor points. However, these minor details were no longer within the scope of Luo Nan's consideration. What he paid the most attention to right now was the tens of thousands of blueprints floating and rotating. A month ago, Luo Nan would have thought that these mechanical schematics were like a heavenly book. But now, they were completely devoid of any sense of jerkiness. This was not only because of his previous hard work, but also because of his large weight, high-intensity recognition, and understanding in a short period of time. These blueprints had a total of 2 sources. One source came from the process of Worker Zhai repairing the Tai Chi Ball dynamo core over the past month. Worker Zhai combed through the dynamic structure and restored a portion that represented the possible direction of function. The second source was a bit further. It came from the spoils of war obtained from killing Jack during the conflict with Quantum Corporation. It was the Deep Sea Type 4 dynamo core. This item was originally going to be auctioned, but Xia City took note of its uniqueness and intercepted it. The branch never relaxed in their research during these 2 months. Some of the research methods they adopted overlapped with Worker Zhai's, so at least 2/3 of the blueprints were quite similar. Without a doubt, there was a fee for borrowing and reading this information. According to Luo Nan's understanding, the overlapped blueprints belonged to the functional structure of over 1,000 threads of varying thickness after the 3-layer structure of the dynamo core was fully unfolded. However, there were some special scenes within the Deep Sea Type 4 dynamo core that Worker Zhai was unable to comprehend at his level. These were the parts that involved the mutual interference between the mental and the material. From Luo Nan's current understanding, this included a portion of the Tower of Babel and Mount Buzhou. This was the core configuration that broke the barrier between the mental and the material. There was also a portion that involved a special structure that covered both the mental and material planes. When the Deep Sea Type 4 dynamo core was fully unfolded, there were some parts that could be felt, known, and measured on the material plane. There were also some parts that were built upon the foundation of the Tower of Babel and Mount Buzhou. This was something that scientific instruments could not detect. In terms of grade, the Deep Sea Type 4 should be at least 1 grade higher than the Tai Chi Ball dynamo core. But then again, Worker Zhai's research was limited by his cultivation. It was difficult for him to detect more details in terms of mental and material interference, so he had to take this into consideration. Unfortunately, Luo Nan didn't have the physical Deep Sea Type 4 dynamo core with him. He was unable to conduct field tests, so he could only use his memories from 2 months ago as a comparison. But 2 months ago, his insight and knowledge couldn't be compared to now, so there was still a lot of blank space to fill in. Also of Luo Nan could not keep the Luo. Luo Nan opened his eyes. He held the plastic bag between his index and middle fingers, holding the dynamo core before his eyes. Under the illumination of the iron cover, a mysterious luster flowed on the regular rhombohedron, attracting his soul. Machine. Under, by. Under the metal. And the regular that. Under. As under. The ceremony was very simple. There was nothing mysterious about it. As the protagonists, Xie Junping and Du Yong, submitted their homework under the witness of the nannies, children, and some religious residents in the orphanage. Then, they were verified by Dean Vanta, the mentor of the order, and they were granted the identity of abstinence bearers in the order. President Wan Ta, on the other hand, announced the end of the ceremony after briefly explaining the concepts of material nature and order. Luo Nin even felt that Dean Wanta wanted to use this opportunity to let the children of the orphanage enjoy a delicious meal prepared by a certain hedonist of Xia City. As for Xie Junping and Du Yong, they were quite satisfied. They had experienced enough of the most powerful, mysterious elements in the test before they officially joined the church, and they had also achieved tangible results. Mysterious plus effective equals devout. This formula was applicable in the vast majority of circumstances. More importantly, it was fine as long as everyone was happy. The ceremony and banquet were very casual. Luo Nin had more private time. He felt that there were too many children at the banquet in the main hall. It was quite noisy, so he walked around the other rooms of the orphanage. Luo Nin had always admired Dean Wanta's skillful hands and design philosophy. The orphanage, which had been converted from an abandoned shopping mall, truly had a style to it. It had a sense of artistic order. The place he was in right now was the reception room he had stayed in last time. He reclined on an old peach-colored sofa. The clamor outside had dropped to a relatively comfortable level, bringing a marvelous sense of tranquility. So Luo Nin spent half an hour here to apply for computing space and to compare and ponder. There was no one to disturb him. It was very comfortable. However, this feeling of comfort inevitably subsided when he faced the dynamo core. He would have to return this little thing to Gym Master Xiao by tomorrow at the latest. Even though he had already left behind a complete blueprint, it would be too easy to think of the dynamo core as a toy to obtain results through a simple comparison of the blueprint. Luo Nin sighed in his mind. He rubbed his fingers and opened the bag. There were no other movements after that. The dynamo core in the bag floated up by itself. It passed through the opening of the bag and floated to a more spacious area outside. Buzz! A deep vibrating sound entered Luo Nin's ears. The dynamo core floating in the air first extended out 6 tentacles. Then the tentacles branched off one by one, forming 30 secondary branches. And on a level that was hard to discern with the naked eye, there were 1,240 even finer filaments. They constructed a complex and dense network that was distributed within an area of 1 meter in diameter. Luo Nin's thoughts turned once more. His soul strength and the material plane interfered with each other, forming nearly incorporeal waves that swept through the area. The changes in its structure were absorbed into his heart lake. It was just as the mechanical schematic showed. The complex structure was undergoing changes all the time. There was practically no good way to confirm its functions one by one, aside from a supercomputer. Fortunately, Luo Nin never hoped that he could decipher the ultimate mysteries of the dynamo core in a short amount of time. Otherwise, he would be looking down on the research capabilities of the entire Earth's academic community. He just used this to dispel the last bit of his unrealistic fantasies. Then he concentrated his energy to search for a certain sign. A defective product. Just like us right now. A defective product. Us right now. Luo Nin cared a lot about Gym Master Xiao's words because it involved his parents and loved ones, and because of the context and wording. From Luo Nin's perspective, Gym Master Xiao's words didn't clearly point out anything, and he didn't clearly link them together. However, the meaning was consistent. The main thrust of their discussion was the outline of human cultivation, and then they focused on the concept of the furnace. Gym Master Xiao's words and his own situation pointed out without a doubt that the current world had yet to obtain a reasonable and complete result regarding the construction method of the furnace. This included the extraordinaries who stood at the apex. Following this logic, Gym Master Xiao mentioned the dynamo core, calling it a defective product. More importantly, there was the word us in his words. In light of this, Luo Nin could only believe that Gym Master Xiao had made an analogy between the dynamo core and the ability users of the current world. At the very least, there were cultivators who touched upon the concept of the furnace. The dynamo core was a defective product. Ability users were also defective products. The defective products of ability users were due to the incomplete construction of the furnace. Then was the defect of the corresponding dynamo core also due to the defect in the structure of the furnace? Also, the defect was relative to the completeness. Where was the complete reference? Luo Nin observed the structure of the dynamo core from many angles, But how could he see through the mysteries within such a short time? As he was observing carefully, he sensed someone coming from outside. He was just about to put away the dynamo core, but a thought flashed through his mind, and he didn't take the next step. A rhythmic knock sounded on the door, and Luo Nan said, "Please come in." The door to the reception room opened, and Dean Wan Ta, who wore a priest-like robe, walked in with slow steps. After entering the room, his gaze naturally fell on the structure of the dynamo core floating in the air. "Dean Wan, you've worked hard." "It's nothing. The children were just a bit noisy. They didn't disturb you, right?" "No. This really is a good place to find tranquility amidst the noise. It's quite suitable to think about problems. Nurse Wang even poured me some water." The two exchanged a few words of greeting, and Luo Nin gestured with his hand, inviting Wan Ta to sit wherever he wanted. Wan Ta sat on a recliner of the same color across from a sofa, his body naturally straight. One of them was so polite that it didn't seem like he was in his own territory, while the other was as casual and natural as if he was at home. It was a bit like the host and the guest had been reversed. However, both sides weren't people who paid much attention to superfluous formalities. They did things according to their hearts, and they displayed considerable respect. Wan Ta respected Luo Nan's privacy, and Luo Nan didn't keep it to himself. Instead, he completely presented the structure of the dynamo core in front of Wan Ta. This kind of magnanimity continued from the first time the two met. This was because they knew that the other belonged to the lawful faction, and the scope of maintaining order was different. Even if they weren't completely like-minded, there was no direct conflict of ideals. More importantly, they both hoped to carry forward their own ideals, to let more people recognize them, and to use them in a broader domain. Therefore, they could accept each other's teachings, and they could compare notes with each other. Luo Nan preserved the structure of the dynamo core because he wanted Wan Ta to give him some advice. "What's this?" "It's a headache. I hope Dean Wan can give me some advice." "Okay, let me take a look. Why not put on a false front?" He didn't waste words after taking a seat. Matter waves radiated from his body, covering the region where the structure of the dynamo core was located. Luo Nan believed that Wan Ta needed to observe for a period of time, but he clearly didn't understand the habitual thinking patterns of this instructor of the Order of Creators. Chapter 500. The size of the water droplet was similar to that of the Tai Chi dynamo core. After it floated in the air, it began to fine-tune its outline. Under the illumination of the light, it revealed an eye-catching prismatic light, turning into a standard rhombohedron. The cross-section reflection and the effect of water waves made it look like both a bright diamond and a warm pearl, very attractive. The illusory reflected light was not within the scope of Luo Nan's attention, but he kept staring at the changes in the water droplet's shape. He looked at how the water droplet, which seemed to have no strength at all, drew its outline out of thin air until it was completely identical to the shape of the Tai Chi ball dynamo core. Was this the myriad pagoda's method of creation? Before Luo Nan could truly analyze it clearly, he saw an even more magnificent magical scene in the next 2 seconds. In an instant, the water was full of light. Thousands of illusory filaments bloomed, vaguely reflecting the light, like a cluster of translucent flowers. As the structure entered a stable state, the wonder disappeared as soon as it appeared. Luo Nan subconsciously sucked in a breath. "Oh, sorry, it's still a little short." Wan Ta clenched his fist, and the water threads that had already dispersed instantly retracted, returning to their original water droplet form. He looked at the structure of the dynamo core, thought for a moment, and asked, "Open the 3 layers one by one, right?" Luonin went, "Oh," and nodded. Then he came to a realization. His interference power changed, causing the dynamo core's fully expanded structure to recover, returning it to its original shape. Then he stimulated and opened it again. Wan Ta observed it carefully and was a little surprised. There is almost no change in the volume. This thing is made of a special material. Maybe there is a change in its physical properties when it is folded. As he spoke, the water droplets were like the dynamo core, spreading out layer by layer. They no longer bloomed instantaneously like in the beginning, and the sensory stimulation was somewhat less. However, the inconceivable shaping and control power within was even more admirable. In a certain sense, Luo Nand could use interference power to construct fine structures, just like the condensation ring. Of course, he could also play with water. He had the soul cloak mode. Through the condensation ring, his divine will could fully interfere with the material plane. He could build a picture of the deep sea and even a wonderful space where water molecules were concentrated. But this method was used at the boundary between the mind and the material, between the virtual and the real. It couldn't be compared to the 10,000 pagodas creation technique, which embodied everything on a purely physical level. Luonan already felt that Wanta's methods were miraculous, but Wanta still felt that it wasn't perfect. He gathered the water droplets again and then reshaped them, as if he would never get tired of it. Luonan didn't tire of this process. His eyes stared fixedly at the sparkling and translucent model. This wasn't just a model. Luonan could feel that when the wanted tower exerted force to maintain its form, this toy should be able to display similar functions to the dynamo core. Luonan sucked in another breath. He suddenly spoke a sentence. "Can you teach me?" Wana didn't say anything. He just shot a glance at Luonan, nodded, and continued with his operation. Luonan didn't say anything more. He focused his mind and watched as the body of water blossomed like a flower, more and more perfectly imitating the structure of the Tai Chi ball dynamo core. The tentacles, secondary branches, and filaments split and expanded layer by layer, forming 3 relatively clear areas. It was more or less the same as what he first saw this scene. Luonan couldn't help but think of an essential factor: formatting theory. From the very beginning, Grandpa's formatting theory had deduced the visualization diagram, the structure of a tetrahedron with inscribed and circumscribed spheres. Luonan had already confirmed that this structure was closely related to the dynamo core. Whether it was the deep-sea type 4 dynamo core, the dynamic structure of the Tai Chi ball dynamo core, or Jack's memories of the moment he transformed from an altered human to a burner, all of them clearly displayed this point. Luonan even guessed that the scientists researching the archetype format should have grasped this key point. For instance, the epic-making inventions like the burner and the format of fire. It was very likely that they had some reference. What about Grandpa? Where did his research originate from? At this moment, Luonan couldn't help but think of the external neuron coiled in his brain. That was also a dynamo core. Whether it was Luonan's emotional delineation or reality verification, both proved that this dynamo core was of a higher level than the other 2 dynamo cores he had seen. It was much higher level. At least from the current research materials, the other 2 dynamo cores didn't possess the function of hollow depository. They couldn't form the subtle configuration of the condensation ring, and they couldn't serve as the key to the building of gear that led to the clouds. But the focus of the current problem lay in the furnace body. If the dynamo core could be viewed as a mechanical system when combined with the visualization diagram, this was precisely the direction of Worker Zhai's research. Then, a mechanical system should have 3 basic parts: the motion department, the transmission department, and the work department. The motion department was most likely the location of the furnace that Jim Mastershio spoke of. Luonan didn't expect to find a complete power source from the dynamo core. It didn't conform to the law of conservation of energy if it relied purely on the dynamo core to generate energy. Even a reactor needed to add nuclear fuel rods. The powerful power possessed by cultivators was produced through the human body's absorption of food and other resources. A higher level could be explained as the mutual interference between the mind and matter, drawing special energy from other dimensions. From this point of view, the truth of the so-called furnace should be the integration and utilization of external resources. On this point, all 3 dynamo cores had shown their worth. The Tai Chi ball dynamo core absorbed external force. The deep-sea type 4 dynamo core absorbed the energy of the deep blue walker's energy storage when Jack controlled it. The external neuron displayed its astonishing ability first, drawing electricity from the energy center of gear. Of course, they all went through a transformation process. Luonan hadn't been electrocuted to death, by the high-voltage electricity. Jim Mastershio had also said things like upgrade step by step. Therefore, the standard of a furnace should be to convert external resources into a higher form of energy to achieve efficient utilization. Which one is more efficient? The Tai Chi ball dynamo core could carry a metal ball that weighed several hundred kilograms by storing and transforming the external force of a strike. The Deep Sea Type 4 dynamo core allowed a cyborg like Jack to generate the format of fire and break through the barrier between the spirit and the material. As for the external neuron, it was even more inconceivable. It opened up a void chamber that could accommodate soul power, and it could change its form at any time to serve as a medium for the interaction between the spirit and the material. Of course, there was a difference in abilities. If Luo Nan were to rank them, the external neuron would undoubtedly be ranked first. The Deep Sea Type 4 Dynamo Core would be ranked second, and the Tai Chi Ball Dynamo Core would be ranked last. But there were far too many details that Luo Nan was unable to make clear of. He was unable to draw the conclusion that this was a defective product. If he could complete the 3 Dynamo Core models and make a direct comparison, he might be able to find out where the differences and flaws were. This was the reason why Luo Nan wanted to learn the Wanta method of creation. Defective product. There had to be a reason. A moment later, Luo Nan flipped open his notebook and lit up the flexible e-ink screen. His gaze rested on a dark gray app icon on the main interface. This icon was in the shape of a tetrahedron with an inscribed circumscribed circle. It was the classic visualization diagram of formatting theory. Right now, it was displayed as an incomplete download. The icon appeared at the end of September, after his confrontation with the human-faced arachnid at the Limestone Water Village pub. It represented his progress in analyzing the Wraith sign or the order framework behind it. Sometimes, it also represented the progress of his cultivation. However, ever since the incident at Frost River Reality, the progress of the icon's analysis had been stuck at the subtle number of 99%. It had remained stagnant. Even though Luo Nan's cultivation had made tremendous progress during this period of time, his level of understanding had continuously increased, and his development of the Wraith Sign's abilities continued to deepen. The icon still had no reaction. If Luo Nan were to consider things from his previous perspective, he could only believe that his understanding of the Wraith Sign and the order framework involved in formatting theory had not made any fundamental breakthroughs. But now, he could not help but consider things from a different perspective. Was there a problem with the Dynamo Core itself? Luo Nan grew more and more impatient to learn the method of creation. However, the most important thing was to discuss the mysteries of the Dynamo Core structure. As the water beads mimicry gradually approached perfection, Luo Nan and Wanta began a corresponding discussion. Differences and arguments were unavoidable when it came to the details. We must consider the factor of materiality. The structure is the most crucial. Forgive me for speaking bluntly. You are running away from an unfamiliar domain. But I feel that we must first find a right entry point. And Dean Wan, I believe that it is a bit biased to be completely bound to the material plane. The voices of the two grew louder and louder. The corresponding domain expanded, involving even more issues of philosophy. It cannot be said that their faces were red and their necks were thick, but it was definitely not as harmonious as it was in the beginning. At this time, there was another knock on the door to the reception room. Little featherhead Di Weiwu poked his head in from outside the door. His eyes widened. Are you guys going to fight? The discussion was forced to stop. Luo Nan and Wanta looked at each other and shook their heads at the same time. No, there's no such thing. Di Weiwu pushed open the door completely. He curled his lips and said, I feel like it. Brother Luo Nan, I know that your abilities are great and that you can fight super well. But we aren't weak here. The child could clearly distinguish between inside and outside. And though his words were casual, Luo Nan and Wanta discovered his nervous mood. It looked like he was really worried. Were they arguing very intensely before? It was likely that the discussion would not succeed today. Luo Nan smiled at Wanta and put away the Dynamo Core. He was just about to pacify the child when a directional message came over from the Hexayear. The Society's guardian target, Sleeping Beauty, has gone missing. Please confirm and assist in the search. Luo Nan had yet to completely understand what was going on when another call came in. The caller was He Yuan. Mr. Luo, Rue Wen has gone missing. She disappeared from the intensive care unit 2 minutes ago. Disappeared? Rue Wen? Luo Nan's brain was a bit unable to react. Isn't her disappearance very? Huh? Luo Nan was a bit stupefied. It must be said that Rue Wen was the freest star in his closed system. Even if she was lying in a hospital bed, her physical position was clear. She would appear and disappear in the projection of the format pyramid and the living starry sky. She would suddenly disappear for a period of time. She was uncontrollable. This was a situation from the beginning. He was used to it. Chapter 501. Rue Wen's sudden disappearance caused the Xia City branch to be thrown into chaos. After all, there were many complicated issues involved aside from finding the person. A new mission channel had been established on the Psychic Wave Network. Fire, theft, Quantum Corporation, and perhaps headquarters as well. In a short amount of time, most of Xia City had been mobilized. It was a chaotic mess. Luo Nan could only leave the orphanage in a hurry after this happened. Before he left, he gave the Tai Chi ball Dynamo Core in his hand to Shuele, who was also attending the ceremony. He asked Shuele to return it to Jim Master Shio for now. Then he took a car to Shangding Building to observe the situation. Luo Nan's thoughts were still unclear after he got in the car, but his emotions were still calm. He activated the resources of the sealed system to try and lock onto a target while he looked at the video He Yuan sent him. The video was a surveillance record of Rue Wen's ward. The time shown was around 2040, approximately 5 minutes ago. At the beginning, the girl was lying peacefully on the hospital bed. There were a few monitoring and life support equipment on her body. Everything looked normal. But several seconds later, the slender girl's eyelashes trembled in the focal area of the surveillance video. Then she opened her eyes. The image was extremely clear, but Luo Nan's mood was a bit absent-minded at this moment. The girl's gaze looked straight at the ceiling. She was serene and calm, not revealing any emotions. She didn't look like the emptiness and bewilderment of someone who had been bedridden for a long time. Instead, she seemed to be extremely clear about her own circumstances. This scene made Luo Nan's heart inexplicably oppressed. This was a person he had personally saved. She was half a believer, but he couldn't say that he was familiar with her. Seriously, who else in this world knew of Rue Wen's true origins besides the laboratory of Quantum Corporation? Perhaps she was already used to similar situations? Luo Nan still remembered that when he faced Gong Qi, who had invaded the cloud world, only Rue Wen had given him a resonance in the entire sealed system when he was agitated and angry. It wasn't a resonance. It was a resonance that was true and void. She seemed calm on the surface, but there was an oppressive and flowing feeling of blazing heat. It perfectly matched Luo Nan's state of mind at the time. Was it an accidental coordination, or was it because of a similar experience? Luo Nan couldn't get an answer, but the emotions in his heart continued to ripple because of those serene eyes. He stared at the image, a bit stunned. At this time, from the surveillance screen, it could be seen that because of Rue Wen's sudden awakening, the inside and outside of the monitoring room were also in a mess. Some medical staff opened the door and came in, wanting to do a further examination. It was conceivable that there would be more people rushing over from the outside. At this moment, the originally clear image suddenly blurred. In reality, it wasn't that the image was blurred, but the reality it reflected was blurred. On the sickbed, Rue Wen was like an illusory bubble. She flashed in the middle of the distorted light and shadow, then disappeared without a trace. In just a tenth of a second, the hospital bed became empty. All the tubes were loosened, and the nutrient solution dripped onto the bedding. There were still traces of a human figure pressing down on the bedding. Such a way of disappearing? Luo Nan was a bit stupefied for a time. He hurriedly rewound the surveillance video to watch. The second time, he felt a little more confident. His body and soul fused into one. This was precisely Rue Wen's forte. She was a special existence that wandered the boundary between the spiritual and the material. At that moment, she was completely an incorporeal spirit. Naturally, she could leave as she pleased. If she could leap into the deep spiritual plane of the Abyss region and the polar domain, even President Ouyang would have a hard time keeping her here. It was easy to say, but the more Luo Nen understood the know-how within, the more he felt that Rue Wen's actions had already completely exceeded the scope of the ordinary concept of supernatural power. The mutual interference of the material and the mental was understandable, but a complete transformation. How in the world did she accomplish this? Luo Nen didn't invest too much energy into this question. In any case, it was impossible for him to figure it out in a short amount of time. Compared to these technical matters, he was more concerned about Rue Wen's current thoughts. Why did this experimental girl, who resonated with a corner of his mind, leave? Where did she want to go? What sort of attitude did she have toward these people, especially him? He sat in the back of the off-road vehicle. His hands were pressed together in front of his mouth and nose, concealing his facial expression. He was even more focused, paying attention to the changes in the living starry sky at all times. Where was she? Where was she? The vehicle had already entered Xiqing district. It made an oblique turn, heading toward the Lilan district. But then Luo Nen suddenly stood up. Wait a moment. Let's go order some wine. Beside him, Qin Ikuin turned his head in astonishment. Which one? Luo Nan's eyes seemed to be closed, but his other perspective within the living starry sky became clearer and clearer. Correspondingly, the resplendent stars shifted their positions, bringing slight ripples to the closed system. Linhai District, Huaying West Road, Dingyang Bar. Hurry up. God borrowed the rearview mirror to glance over. He swung the steering wheel lightly, and the vehicle left autopilot mode. It turned onto another magnetic rail highway, and its speed suddenly increased. Emoya walked out from the back door of the bar. She used a wet towel with makeup remover to wipe off the makeup on her face. There was a wind gap in the back alley. The fine snow powder was like flying knives, whizzing as it struck her face. Emoya felt that this kind of weather was quite refreshing. But her companions in front of her had already shrunk their necks and were fighting to be the first to board the nanny van. Behind her, the new trainee agent cum star scout, Meng Fei, had long since taken precautions. She wore thick winter clothes that were simply prepared for trekking in the wilderness. But when she put on her body, her originally stocky body became even rounder. She really didn't have half the graceful bearing of a business elite. However, she had come to learn from Luo Nan and to freeload a meal. She hadn't officially started working yet, so there was no way to use business etiquette to restrain her. Then she looked at the real agent, Mr. Hai Jing. He was dressed like a man. He wore a coarse trench coat with a dark red scarf. It was very fashionable, and his calm and unhurried posture with his hands in his pockets could even make young girls scream. He was more famous than a star, and he beat up the few disappointing third-rate rock and roll practitioners in front of him. Mountain Creek, which had already begun to be commercialized, spent less and less time in various bars and nightclubs. Most of their performances were friendly performances to repay their previous debts in the underground circle. At the same time, it also further fermented the results of the performance in the municipal square last month. The current situation could only be said to be lukewarm. Every day, they would increase the number of pre-sales for their debut album by a few numbers. That was all. Emoya wiped off the foundation, blush, and the like, and threw the wet towel into the trash can on the side. She had already calculated it, but she didn't expect a sudden gust of wind to blow. The wet towel hit the entrance, hung, and fell out. Fisk so unstylish. If the paparazzi bumped into her, she would be the legendary third-rate female star who casually threw trash. She had no sense of civility. She could get a place on the gossip forums, but she didn't need to fix it now. A strange sound rang out. The cleaning robot that was lying in ambush in a certain corner of the back alley was stimulated. It started up from its standby state and slowly drove over, shoveling away the wet towel. Good lad. Much better than my two younger brothers. When the robot passed by, Emoya patted its silly, black, and thick head. It's up to you to decide. Do you want to go home or go to your nest today? Choose A and bark. Choose B and be silent. The robot slid over expressionlessly. Okay, choose B. Huh? The corner where the cleaning robot had stayed before, which was also the place where junk was placed in the alley, rang with the flapping of wings. It sounded like a bird was struggling. Soon, the sound of scrape was clear. It was a crow that was commonly seen in Xia City. Was it looking for food? There had been more crows in Xia City recently. Emoya felt that she would always encounter similar situations when she went out recently. Crows would fly over her head and around her from time to time. Fortunately, her luck wasn't affected. Haijing also glanced in that direction. It's hard to see other birds in winter besides crows and sparrows. Unless you go to the ecological park. Do you want to take a walk tomorrow? Tomorrow's agenda is to sleep late. You can ask Sister Meng to treat you. Treat it as a bribe. Say more good things in front of the boss in the future. Then forget it. One sentence from Sister Wei is worth 100 sentences from me. The return on investment is obviously not equal. Meng Fei directly flipped the hood of her winter suit over her head. She completely curled into a ball. In this damn weather, I'd rather go to the streets to do my homework than go to some ecological park. At least I can go to the mall to get some heat. Then I hope that you can discover another Sister Wei. Thank you for your blessings. In just a few sentences, the topic had been changed to who knows where. At this time, Malu stuck his head out of the car and urged them to get on. The group of people chatted and laughed as they got on the car. When they were about to get on the car, the cleaning robot had just returned to its original position. The car's lights were turned on, stretching its shadow diagonally forward. Emoya blew the guy a kiss. Thanks. Scrape. It was the crow dubbing. Emoya laughed and was about to get into the car when she suddenly shivered. Wait, she called out and jumped out of the car again. In the car, Shui Yi, who still had a date, was a little annoyed. Are you done? Emoya didn't care at all. She strode forward with her long legs and arrived in front of the car in 2 steps. At this time, the headlights were pointing forward. The snow flew everywhere and reflected a distorted shadow inside the alley. In this long, twisted, chaotic shadow, Moya saw the shadows of the cleaning robot and the junk pile mixed together. At the edge of them, there was a long, swaying shadow. The edges were uneven, and the bottom was slightly curved. It should be the wings of a crow flapping, and there was also half of its body. But below the long shadow, there was a slender shadow. The front part of the shadow merged with the crow's shadow, but the shape of the bent joints could be vaguely seen. And then there was an even more obvious curve of the wrist and the straight line of the arm. Haijing also got out of the car and stood side by side with Emoya. He squinted his eyes and tilted his head slightly. At this moment, he could clearly see that under the illumination of the headlights, there was clearly a slender arm of light supporting the crow. Under the fluttering snow powder, it was trembling slightly. His heart trembled. Emoya had already rushed forward and went straight to the junk pile. Haijing stretched out his hand, but didn't even catch the tail of his shirt. A second later, Emoya's shout filled the alley. Chapter 502. Long Chi came out of the nightclub, wearing a thin cashmere sweater with a high collar. Even with the casual suit hanging on his arm, his clothes were a season different from the others. But this kind of tight-fitting style was also very powerful, showing off a superior and fit figure. The young woman who went out with him wished that she could turn into a warm jacket and stick close to him, creating a short and exciting memory together. However, regardless of whether Long Chi was facing the snowflakes that filled the sky or the young married woman who had tears in her eyes, he was still smiling. He refused the young woman's invitation, but left his social contact number. Then, he walked into the cold wind without looking back. The low temperature of -20 degrees Celsius was meaningless to him, just like the restless woman whose body temperature was about to rise to 40 degrees Celsius. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the nightclub street in the waterfront district had not yet entered its most lively period. He really liked the atmosphere here, but it was a pity that the last-minute mission had brought him some destructive expectations. Walking along the nightclub street for a few hundred meters, he found the designated area with the help of the dazzling red and blue police lights. It was the back alley of a music bar. Looking from here, under the streetlights, the alley was surrounded by a dense group of people. He leisurely walked over. However, just as he stepped into the front of the alley, a throbbing thought suddenly dripped into the lake of his heart. With a dripping sound, a dense chill spread out layer by layer. In the blink of an eye, it spread throughout his entire body. Long Chi shuddered and stopped abruptly. This was something that even a temperature of minus 20 degrees Celsius could not do. Little guy, don't be nervous. Let big sister take a look. In the alley, Emoya took the risk of being hit by the crow's wings. She crouched down and got closer to the child. The child is thin. This was Emoya's first impression. The child was wearing a loose hospital gown. His hair had probably not been taken care of for 2 to 3 months. It hung over his forehead and covered half of his face. Under the shadow of the pile of junk, the crows, and the onlookers, the fragments of light that shone and made his face appear even thinner and paler. It was inevitable that he looked a little gloomy. This made the child appear a bit more mature. But with Luo Nan as a reference, his actual age should be about the same, maybe a bit younger. 14, 15? Emoya tried to confirm if the child had any identification, such as a bracelet on him. Under normal circumstances, in order to make it easier to live in this society, even children who were completely incapacitated would wear identification cards and the like. But after looking around twice, Emoya did not find any similar equipment. But what was the meaning of the hospital gown? In his memory, there was no hospital nearby. The child sitting next to the pile of junk indeed had no intention of moving. He just stared at the crow in his hand. This crow's body was extremely large, much larger than its peers. At this moment, it tilted its head and looked back at the child. Occasionally, it would flap its wings and caw. There seemed to be a hint of helplessness in its voice. In fact, ever since the sudden appearance of this fellow believer, the crow named Ink had not flown for almost half an hour. Ink would not let go of him. Emoya was a little uncertain. She scratched her head and turned around, only to be shocked. Unbeknownst to him, a dense crowd of people had gathered behind him. The members of the Mountain Creek Band, the bar owner who had heard the news, the customers, and a bunch of idlers who had come out to watch the commotion had completely blocked the narrow alley. The policemen who had just arrived were struggling to squeeze in. "The police are here. Everyone get out of the way." Emoya gestured for her manager to chase them away. She suspected that the skinny child in front of her might have some mental illness. This was because the child's expression and attitude did not match a normal situation. There was clearly a circle of people watching, but the child did not speak, did not move, did not care, and did not care. He only gently stroked the crow's feathers in his hand and muttered something incomprehensible. Autism? Schizophrenia? Or something else? Forgive her for thinking this way. There was no helping it. There was an old person in the family who was like this. So, Emoya was more sensitive. She was worried that if too many people gathered, it would cause adverse effects. Hai Jing displayed the responsibility and means of a manager. With just a few words, he got the police to help him chase most of the onlookers back to the bar. At the same time, the other members of the Mountain Creek Band, who could not stand the cold temperature in the back alley, hurriedly got into the car and left under the supervision of Meng Jia. Only Emoya and himself were left. Things were considered normal up to this point, but then things came to a standstill. The little guy sitting in the corner must be mentally different from ordinary people. He didn't speak or move. The people around him, no matter how they tried to persuade him or coax or hug him, couldn't pull him out of the corner. In the end, all they got was the dissatisfied caw of the crow. That was awkward. The police officer was still a young man, and he really wanted to kneel down. This child is too stubborn. The problem is that there is no information in the system, not in the SCA's database. There are no records of a child being admitted to any hospital, welfare home, or nursing home in the city. Why do I feel like this is a major case? I've also notified the SCA Child Welfare Department. Maybe there are specializations. It's just that it's too. Achoo. During the persuasion, Hai Jing had already taken off his windbreaker, wanting to give it to the child to keep him warm. However, the child did not appreciate it at all. The crow flapping its wings was also a hindrance. Hai Jing was too embarrassed to put it back on, so he only draped it over his back and stomped his feet in the cold in the alley. If the situation was not resolved soon, he might be sent to the hospital with a bad cold. But he was most worried about Emoya right now. This beautiful woman, who was highly radiant and cold, thought that she could resist the cold. The clothes she was wearing were just that. So, she must have been badly frozen. There was a commercial show in 2 days, and it would be troublesome if something went wrong. He tried to persuade her. Emoya, you should go back first. I'll stay here and deal with it. I'll let you know as soon as there are results. Emoya also knew that she had caused trouble for everyone. She raised her hand in apology, but she was still a little unwilling. Suddenly, she reached out and pinched the child's cheek. Hey, stubborn child, I'm leaving if you don't respond. It's not too late to regret it. As long as you follow me, I'll serve you hot drinks and cakes. Huh? Strangely enough, in the biting cold wind, her hands were almost frozen stiff, but the child's thin cheeks were still tender and warm, which was very nice to touch. Little did she know that Long Chi, who was in a shadowy corner in the back alley, was watching with his eyes twitching. There was a certain distance between them, but Long Chi was able to confirm who that thin child was. His head and body were covered in a layer of snow powder. His previous partner, the valiant Fist 2 and the big-hearted Wall 5, had suffered heavy injuries from this child's all-penetrating, all-decaying attack. Their bodily functions had been severely damaged, and they had fallen victim to Jack's evil hands on the way back. Fist 2 had died on the spot, and Wall 5 had kept his life. However, he was no longer suited for frontline work, and in the end he resigned in dejection. In that nightmarish night, Long Chi, who had moved out under the code, named Snake 7, hated that shameless and savage cyborg the most. But that guy was already done for. What was left was this child. He seemed to be called Ruewen. He didn't know what kind of energy was contained within her thin and slender body. She actually managed to forcefully break through their 7-man Deep Blue team's encirclement. In the end, they had to use a particle cannon at all costs to knock her unconscious. From an objective point of view, it seemed like their side was a bit more shameless. No matter what, Long Chi, codenamed Snake 7, held extremely complicated feelings towards the child in the alley. He wouldn't be like that stupid woman overflowing with motherly instincts. She wouldn't directly play some killing by touching someone's face. She might even get her arm broken. Since touching someone's face was dangerous, then this mission itself. Many thoughts spun in Long Chi's mind. He exchanged information with the higher-ups who had issued the order, communicating the specifics of the mission. Not even 2 minutes passed before another order was transmitted over. Snake 7, from now on, observe and await orders. Deep Blue, you're a high-ranking employee of Sky Blue Security right now. If you want to earn some extra money, do you need me to help you cancel your employment contract? But please pay a penalty in advance. Understood. Long Chi immediately shrank back. Or perhaps it could be said that he found a reason to stay away from danger. But then he couldn't help but say, Dr. Bai, aren't you worried about your contract? A doctor who came out of Clay's laboratory won't be without a job anywhere. The important thing is that I don't have a penalty clause. The problem is that you also came out of the Apocalypse Laboratory. Coming out of there, are there any living people? Long Chi didn't say these words out loud. Ever since Dr. Bai Xinyan became the person in charge of the Sky Blue Security Xia City branch, the dozens of Deep Blue walkers had come to understand more and more the principle of people under the eaves have no choice but to lower their heads. As a high-ranking researcher who was well-versed in burner theory and the theory of the human body system, Bai Xinyan could adjust their training courses at any time. She could let the trainees have a deep understanding of the obvious difference between heaven and hell, under the premise that it wouldn't be obvious and that it wouldn't affect the results. All right, please instruct. Standardize the mode of operation. Observe and await orders. Yes. In the official operations of the Deep Blue Walkers, skipping ranks to command was a matter that was explicitly forbidden. Long Chi only needed to set the information reception to combat readiness mode, and then he could only accept combat orders from his direct superior. Of course, this also meant that the other command that was still clamoring in his ears right now would be completely blocked out. Long Chi hesitated a bit. Should he directly feign ignorance towards Deep Blue, or should he inform them? At this time, a car came to a stop on the other side of the alley. Someone opened the door and got off the car just as it came to a stop. The alley wasn't long. Long Chi borrowed the streetlight to clearly see the person's face, and the other person's penetrating cold gaze swept over a hair's breadth. Hiss! It was at this moment that Deep Blue became much more anxious. Long Chi, are you listening? Reporting the target's situation. Follow-up support is already on the way. Hello? Hello? Support my ass. Chapter 503. In the middle of the alley, Hai Jing really didn't want Amoya to stick to him anymore, so he went forward and forcefully pushed her out. Let's go, let's go. Leave this to me. I'll send you a photo of the scene every 5 minutes. Okay? Amoya frowned. I think I'm about to convince him. That must be your illusion. While they were arguing, a car sounded at the entrance of the alley. Someone got out. At first, they thought that it was the social welfare agency, but when the street light fell on the person's face, Amoya could not help but be surprised. Luo Nan, what are you doing here? When I was passing by, I saw your nanny van. The reason that Luo Nan blurted out could be said to be full of flaws. But right now, he wasn't in the mood to weave a more complete lie. His gaze went straight past Amoya's shoulder. From this angle, he could only see ink flapping its wings from time to time. Ink being here was actually Luo Nan's arrangement, because Amoya, who was always on the move, was not suitable for a large number of security personnel. For the sake of ensuring her safety, Luo Nan sent the idle Ink to Amoya's side after completing the Tri-Gate security mission. Ink followed Amoya 24 hours a day. If anything unexpected happened, Ink could intervene through the closed system. But Luo Nan never expected that this sort of arrangement would actually attract Rui when over. Luo Nan walked forward with quick steps. His reason kept reminding him to pay attention to his concealment, to not let Amoya see through him. But as his line of sight extended, he saw a thin and gloomy little girl with almost no feminine features sitting in the corner. She was covered in snow powder, sitting under a pile of junk. He saw human figures and other distorted shadows covering her, but the girl was silent. There was only the crow in her eyes. Rui, one was in a completely different dimension from the others. She didn't care about others, and no one really understood her. Luo Nan's heart felt a bit stifled when he saw this scene. Sentences such as "the stallions stand alone," "the shadow hangs by itself" from the ancient text he had learned suddenly materialized. They transformed into a surging black tide that flooded his mind. All right, perhaps Rui didn't need pity, but the feelings still lingered in Luo Nan's heart. It was hard to dissipate in the end. Qi and Ikuan quickly walked past him. Amoya and Hai Jing said something to him. Luo Nan was aware of these circumstances, but he didn't make the appropriate response. This was because his emotions were rising and falling like the tide. The speed of his brain was affected. Luo Nan himself didn't understand why the emotions in his mind were this intense. He was unable to resolve this doubt for a time. He just passed by Amoya and arrived at the side of the junk pile to face Rui 1. Then he saw that the girl was casually kneeling on the ground, holding the ink bottle with one hand, and there seemed to be a slight smile on her lips. Luo Nan half knelt in front of the girl in the next moment. He wanted to say something, but he didn't know what to say. Strictly speaking, this was his first official meeting with Rui 1. In the past, their communication was either through ink or through a closed system. Rui 1 also sensed something. Her gaze moved away from the ink for the first time to fall on Luo Nan's face. There was no change in his expression, only his eyes were sparkling. He raised his head, someone exclaimed. Then, Amoya's voice rang out. He's reacting to you. As expected, it's better to be around the same age. Luo Nan didn't say anything, but he came to a realization in his mind. Forgive him for overstepping his bounds and standing in Rui 1's position. No matter what the nature was, he really was Rui 1's only coordinate relative to this world at this current stage. It must be known that Rui 1 had already found Ink, the person she believed to be of the same species. Then, she was surrounded by a circle of people. Presumably, she wasn't feeling too comfortable. With her abilities, she could escape into the mental plane once more and break away from this environment. As for misgivings, with her usual reactions, they simply didn't exist. But why didn't she move? Luo Nan knew that at least a part of the reason was because of the information he transmitted through the closed system, just like the gaze that was cast over right now. He, Luo Nan, possessed a certain degree of existence in Rue Wen's heart. He even possessed a sense of identity. This was good news, right? Rue Wen didn't look at Luo Nan for too long. She shifted her gaze and spoke to Ink in a low voice. Perhaps Ink's intelligence was higher than 99% of crows, but this didn't mean that it was able to understand Rue Wen's meaning. To put it bluntly, this was a one-way communication between chickens and ducks. But when Luo Nan looked straight at Rue Wen, he saw the faintly discernible smile on her lips. It was an attitude of tranquility and satisfaction. Luo Nan grew more and more speechless when faced with this situation. But it was also at this time that his train of thought opened up a bit. He suddenly understood where the surging tide of emotions in his heart came from. Actually, it was him. Luo Nan looked at Rue Wen right now. It was like he was looking at himself when he was experimenting alone. He would be excited because he was still alive after increasing the dosage of the drug. He would also be satisfied because the degree of pain he felt after taking the drug one day was slightly reduced. But was that really satisfaction? That should be the respite he felt after temporarily escaping from hell. It was also the hypnotic pleasure brought by the glimmer of light when he faced an unreachable goal, when he couldn't see the complete path. As Luo Nan grew older, he became more accustomed to the recent 2 or 3 months of leaps and bounds in his accomplishments. He recalled the muddle-headedness of his first experiments and often shuddered with fear. How much luck did he use in order to endure through the initial juncture? This question was already incalculable. But Luo Nan felt that there was no difference between the current Rue Wen and him back then. He was practically 100% certain that even if Rue Wen were to face death, she would probably be like this right now. This was because she had never understood or experienced what a normal, splendid life should be like. The laboratory and the fighting arena filled up everything that Rue Wen once was. There are some things that I need to properly teach you, even though I'm not too good at it. Luo Nan spoke in a low voice. His voice was fuzzy and hoarse. Even he himself nearly couldn't hear it clearly. Luo Nan, Emoya felt that something was wrong. Luo Nan didn't respond. He just extended his hand towards Rue Wen. Come. Together. Rue Wen shifted her gaze once more. She tilted her head slightly, probably due to ink blocking her view. So much so that she carried a bit of careless childishness. Perhaps it was the closed system that allowed them to communicate telepathically. Or perhaps it was the face-to-face communication that transmitted sufficient information. Rue Wen didn't move. She allowed Luo Nan's hand to reach over. There was a slight commotion behind them. At the same time, the snow powder swirled past their eyes. It was just like the gazes and attitudes of the people in the outside world. It didn't cause any interference. Luo Nan grabbed Rue Wen's left arm. The girl's arm was slender and slender. It could be grasped. It was this arm that was supporting the massive body of ink right now. Next, Luo Nan lightly exerted force. The girl was like a ghost that didn't exert any strength at all. She gracefully stood up. A thin layer of snow powder slid down from her shoulder. Some of it landed on the wrists and arms of the two, quickly melting away. Although not many of the surrounding people understood what was going on, they still let out a breath of relief. Only Luo Nan felt the pressure in his heart grow, even though he didn't use any strength in his hand. From this moment on, the connection between him and Rue Wen was no longer illusory. Instead, it was a carrier that truly merged with reality. All the people in the know, the onlookers behind them, the people with ulterior motives hidden in the shadows, and the fellows who were hiding their heads and showing their tails were all witnesses. Mr. Luo, He Wayne took the initiative to communicate with him. What she said was very realistic. For the sake of safety, let us take over right now. Luo Nan just needed to nod his head, and the Xia City branch would shoulder this burden. The iron triangle formed by President Ouyang, Old Yu, and Her Majesty Empress Wu would be one of the most headache-inducing combinations in the world. The impenetrable wall they constructed was enough to make those with ulterior motives break their heads and bleed. This was, without a doubt, the most reasonable choice. However, Luo Nin couldn't help overstepping his boundaries. He tried to consider things from Rue Wen's point of view. Should he let her return to the intensive care unit? Or should he watch her over and over again in the snowy night with a crow as her companion, talking to herself in her own world for all eternity? This wouldn't do. I'll accompany her for a while. Luo Nin himself didn't have a clear understanding of what a while meant. As a non-security personnel who needed a bodyguard to protect him, there were many things he didn't have sufficient position on. Let's just say that he had a childish illness. Luo Nin needed to clearly understand his own responsibilities and obligations. They were right before his eyes. Otherwise, this illusory courage and responsibility, which might have arisen from impulsiveness, might be crushed by the heavy pressure behind him. It would be hard to leave a trickle behind. He Wayne didn't respond immediately. She seemed to be weighing the pros and cons. This reaction startled Luo Nin a bit. Could it be that he Wayne was once again indulging his willfulness out of habit? Or could it be that his proposal had a benefit that even he himself wasn't clear about? Luo Nin didn't understand for a time, but this gave him the confidence and reason to continue persevering. We'll be together. I can't speak of anything else, but at the very least, in this world, a fellow who can do something unfavorable to us and catch us unprepared has yet to be born. Luo Nin really didn't have the face to say these last words. But in this moment, when his thoughts were clear, he really did do something. Ink was a bit restless. It flapped its wings, and this time the force restricting its flight suddenly disappeared. It flew into the air as if relieved of a heavy burden, circling above the alley. But at this time, the snow powder floating down from the sky suddenly became much more sluggish. Icy cold liquid seeped in through the gaps between Ink's feathers. It was very uncomfortable. In the shadows of the alley, Long Seven was under Qin Ikuan's near face-to-face surveillance. He behaved like an ambassador of peace. His entire body didn't make any unnecessary movements. But at this moment, he subconsciously raised his head. The water droplets hit his face and immediately turned into ice. The cold penetrated into his bones. It was unknown when, but the fluttering snow powder transformed into a special form between ice particles and water droplets. Was it hail or freezing rain? Chapter 504. Why aren't you moving? He's right there. We need to observe. I just need him to cooperate. I'm not asking him to risk his life. I need to outsmart him. Then that's really unfortunate. That unlucky bastard has already been exposed. Do you remember? He once met your target face to face. If you really want to go, then it won't be outsmarting him. It'll be a provocation. Not only do you want him to go provoke a dangerous target, but you want him to provoke a paranoid maniac who can slaughter half of Xia City at any time. What does half of Xia City have to do with me? You're very clear on C2834's value. Her value is immeasurable. Don't talk about half of Xia City. 10 Xia cities, 100 Xia cities. Are you sure that the Federation Council agrees before you say these words? There are 88 large metropolitan areas in the world. 100 Xia cities. How do you convert them? Don't try to sell your glib tongue. Think about your ex. I'm not married, and I don't have a formal relationship. What do you mean by ex? We're not familiar with each other. I can sue you for slander if you speak carelessly. By Xinyan. The other side slammed the table. You've been in Xia City for the past 2 months. You haven't done a single thing that you should have done. Instead, you've gotten along well with the Xia City branch. You put in a lot of effort in treating Luo Nan's injuries. Now you're evading in every possible way. I seriously doubt your position. If this matter isn't handled properly, then you'll have to take full responsibility. The irrational communication was cut off at this point. But then again, wasn't the other side just shouting that last sentence? Everything was a routine. Bai Xinyan didn't care, but she wouldn't let the other side succeed. After the communication was cut off, she immediately sent a text message to the other side. Appeal to the higher-ups. I'll let you go first. 3 seconds later, the communication was connected again. It was the same person, but the hysterical mood was close to non-existent. He was just a bit irritated and helpless. What the hell do you want? This is what I want to ask. Ever since C-2834 entered the Shangding building, all relevant information has been reported to the lab through a stable channel. I can imagine that in the future, as long as C-2834 is under the control of the Xia City branch, there will be a steady stream of information. What else do you want? Research requires first-hand information. You should understand that the existence of C-2834 indicates that there is a huge problem with the direction of the Bloodline project. If we can't find the root of the problem, this project will be stalled indefinitely. Instructor Li Wei is very angry about this. We are also under a lot of pressure. Speaking of that name, the voice on the other side instinctively lowered. I understand. That's why you're acting like a cornered dog jumping over a wall. Or rather, you're putting on a show for that person. The other party froze. Bai Xinyan smiled. Fortunately, you haven't completely lost your rationality. At least, you still have the idea of outsmarting the enemy. The beginning is still acceptable. Even if the follow-up plan is too horrible to look at, that's not a big deal. As long as you understand that your life is precious, this is still an era where you can be willful if you have money. The other party spoke again. What do you think? I'm now the manager of Quantum Holdings, so I naturally have to consider things from the company standpoint. Therefore, I think that as a company, the person at the helm must show the courage of a capitalist. If the project can be solved with money and can be profitable in the end, don't consider other means. Throw money at him? Too rough. Right now, storytelling is rather popular in the capital market, especially in the early stages. We can first test the waters. What do you think of the name Mist 2 in 1000? The other party was silent again. As a senior executive of the Deep Blue World Joint Project, he was deeply involved in the relevant matters. Of course, he knew what the ratio of 2 in 1000 meant. Just over a month ago, they had a business discussion with the Ability User Association's headquarters. They had offered 2 in 1000 shares of the Deep Blue World Joint Project in exchange for the rights to C-2834. At the time, they had wanted the headquarters to take the lead in an attempt to circumvent the protection of the 2 extraordinaries. Unfortunately, they hadn't been able to do so in the end. Instead, Gong Qi, who had led the team into Xia City, had lost quite a bit of face. Now that Bai Xinyan had brought up the old matter again, he immediately understood the meaning behind it. 2 in 1000 of 8 trillion was 16 billion. Money itself didn't have any meaning. The Deep Blue World Joint Project had a lot of information, as well as the research results that were about to make a huge breakthrough. Because of this, Mist 2 in 1000 were the most valuable parts. As far as the parties who had already participated in the project were concerned, the information and results were all clearly marked on the agreement. 2 in 1000 was 16 billion. It wouldn't increase their rights and interests by much, but it also wouldn't cause any considerable losses. But as far as the other capitals and powers in the world were concerned, the qualifications they didn't have the opportunity to obtain in the past were the most important. Even if it was still a bottomless pit for the time being, and they had to continuously throw money into it. Once the results were out, 16 billion, 8 trillion, that was nothing. This was a super project that could affect the entire era. Originally, it was just a targeted distribution, but all of a sudden, it was a public offering. Regardless of whether the information was true or not, for the sake of the astronomical profits in the next few decades, it was easy to imagine that there would definitely be capital parties and powers burning with greed to make such an investment. Of course, there might also be desperados who had delusions of getting rich overnight. 16 billion was already an enormous amount of wealth that could establish a considerable foundation. And from beginning to end, they only needed to leak a little bit of information. They didn't even need the authorization of the board of directors. In any case, that 2 in 1000 was the portion that had to be sent out. The Ability User Headquarters even had to share some of the suspicion. Everything was ready, and there wouldn't be any obvious evidence left behind. Light as a feather, but it would stir the overflowing hearts of people. In the face of greedy hyenas from all sides, even if Xia City had the Iron Triangle, they would still be flustered for a period of time. After all, desperados didn't have the sensitive points that major powers would be wary of in a confrontation. And in the field of capital, they would break through all bottom lines. You have a grudge with them, right? The other side had completely forgotten the suspected collaboration with the enemy at the end of the previous communication. In his opinion, this kind of ruthless extermination plan was not a blood feud, so there was no reason to do so. Ha! Bysinyan laughed without any sincerity. She skipped over this topic and moved on to a more realistic level. And your plan? Although it's terrible to look at, it's enough to throw a brick to attract Jade. While you're at it, it's also enough to make the information true. During this period of time, because of the problems with the two orders of justice and Bloodflame, Xia City has filled in a lot of unstable factors. These are all resources that can be used. Okay, hey, where are you going? A friend is in trouble, so of course I have to help. I'm very clear about the issue of my position. The legendary Black-Hearted Salt really lived up to his name. The radio waves shuttling back and forth in Xia City were gradually permeating with malice. But in the small alley behind the bar, people were still struggling over the details. You two seem to have quite the affinity. Emoya rubbed her chin and looked at the two half-grown children standing side by side. She had a lot of doubts in her heart, but now was not the time to be calculative. Since you two can get along so well, just bring him home. Let's ask Dad to help and see if he can figure out the child's identity. As a high-ranking employee of the SC, Mo Haiyang did indeed have the ability to do so. However, Emoya said it so casually that Hai Jing also had a headache. It wasn't that he didn't have sympathy, but for a normal person, wasn't it the best choice to let the police handle it? The young police officer who sent the police on the other side also had a headache. If we can't find any information, this child is most likely an illegal resident. The voice behind him became softer. He also felt that Hai Jing was the only reliable one in this group of people, so he discussed with him. I suspect that this child may be a wilderness vagrant. Let's take the child back to the police station first, and then let the Civil Affairs Department handle it. Vagrant? Yes, there have been a lot of vagrants entering the city recently, and many of them haven't completed the procedures. According to the regulations, these illegal residents must be registered by the Civil Affairs Department and either sent back to the designated temporary residential area or to the designated welfare center. Where are the residential areas and the welfare center? The police officer found the closest ones and showed them to Hai Jing. The latter was shocked. Why are they all in the west? Of course. After all, Xia City is surrounded by the sea on 3 sides, and only the west side is close to the wilderness. The government also followed the principle of the nearest settlement. That side is more than 100 kilometers away from the coastal area. How did the child get here? While they were talking, the late staff of the Child Welfare Center finally arrived at the scene. His explanation was similar to the young police officer. There's no information at all. The most likely possibility is that he's an illegal resident from the residential area. Now, there are 2 choices. Either his relatives in the residential area claim him, or he'll be temporarily taken in by the welfare center and wait for the charity to adopt him. The Child Welfare Center that Hai Jing notified was a government department under the SCA. The person who came was a civil servant, and he looked quite capable. He used his wristband to take a picture of Rue 1 and said, "We need to complete the information here, but it's too late today. Let's find a place to settle down first. Tomorrow. Oh, tomorrow is Sunday. We need to wait until Monday for the relevant procedures to be completed." He operated his wristband. There's an empty bed at the Santa Maria Charity Hall, 27 kilometers away. This welfare center isn't close, but it's backed by a hospital. The facilities are more complete, and it's more convenient to collect information. Emoya and Hai Jing glanced at each other. It seemed that this was a good way to handle things. Just then, Luo Nan raised his hand. How about this? I'll stay with her at the welfare center for 1 night. When that time came, the branch should be able to prepare the relevant information. Setting up the identity of a vagrant and appointing an adoptive family was a good background. You? The staff of the welfare center furrowed his brows. You are? We're the informants. The older sister had to bear the burden of her younger brother's willfulness, and this was a good thing. Emoya roughly communicated, but the staff of the welfare center shook his head. That's not necessary. We have professionals looking after her. Do you think she'll be obedient if I don't accompany her? Luo Nin was still holding on to Rue Wen's wrist. He didn't let go for even a moment. Emoya turned her head and suddenly realized that something was wrong. The police stepped forward and reported the situation to the staff of the welfare center. The staff of the welfare center had a serious expression when they learned of the situation. Everyone, this isn't just a matter of charity. It also involves the basic collection of information in today's society, the placement of vagrants, and a series of other technical issues. We will be responsible for the vulnerable, but we also need to be responsible for the SCA and the relevant social order at the same time. So, the staff of the welfare center paused, and a stiff smile appeared on his face. You can follow. We welcome the public to supervise our work, but please don't interfere with the normal procedures. The matter was barely resolved now that it had reached this point. The young police officer finished recording the incident and left. Luo Nan's group, along with Emoya and Hai Jing, followed the vehicle of the welfare center to the Santa Maria Charity Hall. Since the nanny van had already left, Luo Nan made arrangements. Me, Rue 1, Sis, Brother Hai Jing will all sit in the same van. Brother Chin can sit in the front. The back of the van is spacious. The four of us can still fit in. There were no problems with his arrangement, but Emoya cast a subtle glance at him. Rue 1, you know each other? I just asked. You didn't hear me when you were talking to the police. Emoya narrowed her eyes, but she didn't say anything. The group of people got on the van, and they followed the vehicle of the welfare center. Rue 1 sat by the window. She was looking out the window at the direction where ink was flapping its wings. It'll be fine. It'll definitely follow. Luo Nin knew what she was thinking and hurried to comfort her. During this time, the feedback of the closed system continued to affect Ink's body. Aside from enlargement of its body, the bald crow's strength, agility, endurance, and other hard indicators all increased. Its flying speed was at least twice that of its peers. It could even be compared with some falcons. Rue 1 didn't respond, but Luo Nin understood that she already knew. From Rue 1's perspective, Ink and Luo Nin were her main focus. It was enough for her to pay attention to them for the time being. But from Luo Nan's perspective, the things he had to worry about had begun to rapidly expand from the moment he held Rue 1's arm. Many of them involved areas he had never touched before. This was undoubtedly an enormous challenge. But Luo Nin wasn't afraid. He had Rue 1 by his side, and she had placed her trust in him. The illusory courage and sense of responsibility in his heart was hammering into reality bit by bit. He had to do something, and he was already doing it. A thin layer of sweat seeped out of his body. This was a natural reaction after consuming energy. And right now, the rate at which his soul strength increased was rapidly slowing down. Even his reserve water level was dropping. Outside the window, the freezing rain grew denser and denser. It was mixed with fine ice shards that hit the van with rustling sounds. A gap had already opened up in a corner of the void within this icy curtain of rain. An invisible soul cloak was wantonly expanding in this area where water molecules were rich. It was heading east. It had already plunged into the domain of the ocean. It was heading west at a speed far beyond the reach of vehicles. It covered Linhai, Lilan, Nade, East City, South City, Zhongshu, and the other 6 or 7 administrative districts of Xia City. It covered an area of nearly 10,000 square kilometers. In a few more minutes, West City, Pingjiang, River Wu, Woodwall, and the other western administrative districts would be covered by the Soul Cloak. Chapter 505. The small mechanical spider crawled along the corridor. It was fast, but it didn't bump into any railings or corners. This was a popular bionic toy, and it was also the favorite of the children in the orphanage. Many people might think that it was ugly, but most children still thought that it was cute and sometimes cool. Especially when it was wandering in the dark, its 6 sensory eyes would flicker unpredictably. It could scare people to the point that they would jump in fright. Without a doubt, this was the favorite of those naughty kids. The toy spider in the Santa Maria Charity Hall was only a basic version. Although the six sensory eyes could send and receive signals and identify directions and obstacles so that they wouldn't be reduced to mere decorations, they didn't have imaging functions. However, for some people, a simple stream of information was enough. 2 blocks away from the Santa Maria Charity Hall, the straight line distance was about 5 kilometers. Inside a high-rise office building, the lights were still on at 10 o'clock in the evening on the 75th floor, even though it was a weekend. The relevant personnel were hurrying to set up the relevant equipment, and some people were already playing in front of the temporary workbench. Come on, give me a big signal. Get out, I'll shoot you in the face with little noise. The young black man in front of the workbench was wearing headphones. His body continued to move rhythmically, and he was completely immersed in self-entertainment. Nobody bothered him. On the one hand, this was his working state, and on the other hand, it was none of their business. The light screen in front of the young black man was full of irregular red, green, and blue blocks, which were constantly piecing together and changing according to his rhythm. There seemed to be some pattern, but overall, it was still very blurry. Batu, the operations director of Put's Service Company, stood behind the young black man with a serious expression, but he was actually quite envious. The noise in front of him was a very outstanding reconnaissance ability user. He could capture monotonous and fragmented signals and complete the outline of the scene. He could also carry out high-power active interference. Through specific amplification equipment, his range of influence could reach hundreds of kilometers away. He could be described as a human-shaped radar and electronic interference system. Such talents were usually intercepted by the military early on, and so was noise. However, this guy had psychological problems. He claimed that he was big and couldn't control his crotch, so he should have been shot if he committed a crime in the military. However, he was taken out by a certain powerhouse and joined the powerhouse's team, continuing to cause trouble outside. Tonight was a joint operation between Put Service Company and that powerhouse team. According to the accurate information obtained from both sides' channels, the current temporary resident of the Santa Maria Charity Hall, the girl named Rue 1, already had a net worth as high as $16 billion. Moreover, it was a discount from the shares of the Deep Blue World joint project. Whether the information was true or not, it would be up to his superiors to judge. As for how to interpret the value of the information, there was no need to go into detail. The most realistic situation was that every power would swarm over as the news spread. They must seize it as soon as possible. The branch in Xia City would also respond quickly. It was hard to say what would happen next. But tonight, because Rue 1 had entered the secular world, she was placed in this charity hall. She was temporarily separated from the core protective network of the Xia City branch. Without a doubt, this was their best and last chance. Put Service Company was a medium-sized assassination service provider. It couldn't be considered to be at the top of the industry. Noise's metal hunting group was an extraordinary business, but there was still a considerable disparity when compared to the standards of the Xia City branch. Even if both sides joined forces, they still didn't possess the strength to directly confront Ouyang Chun and Her Majesty Empress Wu. Too extraordinary. They could only catch them off guard by surprise. Of course, they also needed to have sufficient methods of shifting the blame. Only then could they guarantee that they would be able to escape unscathed regardless of the mission's success or failure. Batu could roughly guess the inside of the powerhouse behind the metal hunting group. Aside from the standard of strength, Put Service Company was chosen because they had a ready-made network and team in Xia City. They also valued their mercenary channels that covered every major city in East Asia and the vagrant tribes of the wilderness. They also valued their superclass shifting skills. It just so happened that Xia City had recently accepted several vagrant tribes. Dragons and snakes were mixed in them. There were a lot of desperados who were experts in their studies. Just as Batu was thinking about how to deal with the aftermath, someone walked into the workshop. The 2-meter-tall and sturdy body was very conspicuous. It was like the sound of metal plates rubbing against each other. There was a powerful oppressive force. "You still haven't released the map?" "Mr. Gang Xiong." Batu greeted him. His gaze swept past the man's shoulder and neck structure, and he saw that Noise was jumping high and did not respond. So he said on his behalf, it's raining now. The disturbance is probably not small. The person who came was the third in command of the metal hunting group, Throat Splitter Gang Xiong. He was a very famous veteran architect and a B-rank powerhouse. Rumor has it that he once had a large part of his throat torn off, but he relied on his tenacious life force to survive. He only underwent a physical transformation. From then on, he liked to tear people's throats when he killed them. He received the fierce name of Throat Splitter. After Gang Xiong entered the workshop, he took on the responsibility of commanding. He asked about the progress of the technical team. "How's the cracking going?" "We still need around 10 minutes. The security system of the charity hall is connected to the Santa Maria Church Hospital. It will be quite troublesome to hack in." "Mr. Gang Xiong, we could take advantage of this time to have a brief tactical meeting." Motherf asterisk her. Batu choked. Fortunately, he knew that Noise had made a breakthrough. This black bro threw off the monitoring headphones. He straightened his buttocks and screamed in excitement. Noise was a scumbag, but his skills were top-notch. As he screamed, the meaningless color blocks on the screen quickly decreased. It was like a streaming video with an unstable signal. There were more lags and mosaics, but the basic outline of the video was already visible. Sand table. Gang Xiong signaled his assistant to do something. Very soon, the digital sand table that had just been placed in the middle of the room displayed a panoramic 3D projection of the Santa Maria Charity Hall. It was a translucent grayish-white color. But a few seconds later, Noise was more or less settled. The relevant data was transferred to the sand table, and bright colors were smeared over it layer by layer. At the beginning, there were some mosaics, but it quickly became clear. Especially in the special marked areas, a few human figures appeared. In the sand table projection, they were about the size of a finger, but their appearances were similar. The details were exquisite, and they were lifelike. They were the target of their target tonight. The charity hall was quite generous to temporary guests. The individual room on the first floor of the residential area was located at the corner of the building. Because of the flower bed, it could be considered a relatively independent half-enclosed courtyard. It was relatively quiet, and it was easy to make a move. Noise was ecstatic. Damned weather, damned weather, damned weather. I'll let you guys experience it. The sand table projection was covered by a blurry curtain of rain as soon as he finished speaking. Batu furrowed his brows, but didn't say anything. It wasn't bad to be able to restore the scene in a more complete manner. Through this curtain of rain, he could also see a few details. In this freezing rain environment, low-altitude drones can be eliminated. A large lump of ice will fall in less than a few minutes. Gang Xiong was expressionless. He tapped the edge of the sand table with his finger. What else? Batu was stunned, and Noise began to laugh mischievously. At the same time, the blank area in the sky above the projection showed the avatars and simple information of the 5 targets. Professional bodyguards with ability, former military deep blue walkers, and this humanoid infrasound array. Every time Noise mentioned a person's characteristics, a circle of special colored areas lit up in the projection area. Qin Ikuan's sensing range is approximately 30 meters. God's ability is a bit worse, approximately 20 meters. But you have to pay attention to the car parked beside the dormitory building. It is equipped with extremely sensitive sensing equipment. It is recommended that you don't use high-powered equipment within a 2-kilometer radius. Within 100 meters, you can view him as a mental sensing expert. Only now did Batu know that Noise could actually capture information about the target's mental sensing range and reproduce it. It was truly inconceivable that his scouting ability could be displayed to such an extent. Noise had long since gotten used to this job. Of course, there's that youngster. Let's do a zoom. All right, we need to expand the range of the model. At least 3 kilometers. That shameless little fellow has a sensing radius of 3 kilometers. Batu was stunned. Radius or diameter? Noise chuckled. Are your ears not good? I said it was a radius. Everyone's luck is pretty good. We're separated by 2 blocks and diverged by 500 meters. Otherwise, we would be carefully considering how to resolve the awkwardness. Resolve the awkwardness? It should be said that they were running for their lives. While Batu rejoiced, he still found it somewhat hard to believe. A sensing range of 3 kilometers. Could that fellow be an extraordinary? Noise ignored him and continued with his work. Next, dark scars hung down one after another in the projection area. Gang Xiong was rather interested. What is this? I don't know. In any case, it's very irritating. Back when I was stuffed into the military prison and had my ass busted, it was more or less the same feeling. Just this information alone can be sold for 1 million or 800,000 without a problem. If any of you dare leak it out, you'll be my enemy. Batu's head was a bit swollen. If it really is 3 kilometers, any frontal operation is meaningless. Discussing this topic is really meaningless. Gang Xiong casually waved his hand, moving the 3 most threatening figures to one side and gathering the other 2 normal people in the middle. If these 5 people are all staying at the charity hall tonight, there's practically nothing we can do apart from forcefully attacking. This is the worst-case scenario. I'll consider canceling this operation. Batu nodded. I agree. Gang Xiong sneered. That's not very likely. The charity hall isn't a hotel, and our pioneers aren't idiots. From Batu's understanding, the so-called pioneer should be Quantum Holdings. According to the intelligence channels of the 2 partners, Luo Nan's group, arriving at the Santa Maria Charity Hall, had traces of Quantum Corporation's operations. Perhaps the other side also wanted to catch them off guard. Gang Xiong didn't care. We're only considering the latter scenario. This woman and her manager will leave. Maybe they'll give her a bodyguard. Maybe they won't. But no matter what, we're keeping an eye on her. A diversion? Don't speak nonsense. Gang Xiong swept his ice-cold gaze over. You must have forgotten this. His finger pointed at the core position marked on the sand table. Our target is this Rue-1. She's also someone who dealt with Quantum Corporation's Deep Blue Walker Squad. It's said that her close combat abilities are extremely strong. Do you want to verify it? Gang Xiong waved his hand without waiting for Batu to respond. If we really touch her, our plan will pretty much be finished. So we're only considering her. Gang Xiong flicked his finger, forming fine ripples on the projected virtual interface. It doesn't matter how many people leave. We only want her. Get rid of the bodyguard and send the manager's head back. Also, Noise, it's time for you to show off. We need to record an additional video. Is it the kind I like the most? Noise's wide mouth opened, revealing white teeth and a purple tongue. Together with the light and shadow on the sand table, it formed a strange image. Can I let loose and play? Steel, you can always get to where I itch the most. That woman's waist and legs are too great. She's definitely a good gun rack. I'll take good care of her. I'll just break her 2 arms. Gang Xiong didn't pay attention to Noise's wild imagination. He just zoomed in on the projected area again, making the map show a wider area to plan the subsequent route. Putt Company's mercenaries will be useful after the attack begins. Stop them on the spot and delay the other side's rescue speed. It'll also give him time to watch the video. I hope you've made sufficient preparations. We've prepared 4 teams, and we've also prepared a wonderful disturbance. Batu was quite confident in his profession, but right now he was a bit unsure. But Mr. Gang Xiong, are you sure you want to make a move on that person, sister? If you mess up, we're cooperating with your company because we like your operational abilities. We have a good target of frame, right? That's right, but no buts. That young man himself is worth 16 billion, but he definitely shouldn't tie himself to the future power of this planet. He and his family don't have this right. Gang Xiong acted like a philosopher. His thick lips cracked open. If he can survive, he might even be able to foil our operation tonight. But for a long period of time, he'll have to face similar situations. I hope he can make a choice in time. Otherwise, he'll definitely be running for his life until there's nothing left to look forward to. Batu didn't say anything, but he made up his mind to apply for a transfer after this. Otherwise, he might end up as cannon fodder. Gang Xiong concluded, what he does in the future has nothing to do with me. I need opportunities in time. I just want long legs. F asterisk CK, F asterisk CK, F asterisk CK, F asterisk CK. Noise responded loudly, getting more and more agitated. Gang Xiong still didn't care and continued planning the route. Our retreat direction is the sea. The closest place is the south coast. We can also avoid the Lilan district in the northeast. Oh, Gang Xiong, hurry up and start. My crotch is about to explode. As he spoke, Noise actually began to loosen his belt. He completely disregarded the current situation. This fellow was a complete pervert. I won't cut your thing, but I can pull out your throat. Gang Xiong finally issued a warning. Batu let out a sigh of relief when he saw Gang Xiong restraining him. But he soon realized something. His expression quickly changed. Go to the sea? That's not what we originally agreed on. Yes, you want to enter the wilderness and use your outstanding ability to fish in troubled waters. And this is what we need. But if we head there directly, we need to traverse the entire city of Xia City. With the coverage of the psychic wave network, I don't think we have this opportunity. The sea is completely unobstructed. We can first enter the sea and then circle around the defensive line of the coastal defense forces. We can land ashore and cut into the interior from Mahjong. Although we'll take a long detour, we'll be able to catch many people off guard. Gang Xiong moved the core of the projection back to the charity hall. Before that, don't forget, before we reach the sea, all we have are hostages and bargaining chips. The most important thing is how to get our hands on the target. Our boss is waiting in the open sea. Mr. Jin Tong. Tu subconsciously felt a bit of reverence when he heard news of extraordinaries. Gang Xiong was even calmer. Boss Jin is coming from the sea. Of course we have to go to the sea. Otherwise, do you really think that Ouyang Chun and the martial monarch are watchdogs and ain't queens? You won't take them out of their nest. Batu was stunned for a few seconds before saying, of course it's great to have Mr. Jin Tong holding the line, but I'll have to talk to the higher-ups about the direction. Gang Xiong waved his hand. Do as you wish, but don't waste time. Batu walked out with a gloomy face. He heard Noise's clamor behind him. How many times do you think I should fire? 70, 80, or 90 times? You believe I can do it, right? Shut up. No. You can't handle my enthusiasm. Ugh. A muffled explosion seemed to ring out in the room. The voice came to a screeching halt. Batu rejoiced that Gang Xiong had finally taken precautions. When he closed the door, he turned his head to look, but he saw Noise's mouth open. Noise's hands were hanging down, and the waistband of his pants fell to the ground, revealing the toy inside. It was truly an eyesore. But the important thing now was that dark red liquid was surging out of Noise's mouth. His eyes, nostrils, and ears were all the same. Enemy attack. Long-range sniper. This was Batu's first reaction. He instantly fell to the ground, and at the same time, he exerted force in his legs and moved backwards. He even pulled the door and closed it, blocking the sniper's line of sight. His reaction could not be said to be slow. But at this moment, blazing red light shot out, filling the room in an instant, blasting the closed outer door into pieces. Batu also saw that the color of the projection area was already completely covered in blood red, and the corresponding outline was rapidly becoming blurry. But in that patch of blood red light, there was clearly a shadow that looked like a mix of a spider and a human. It was ugly and malevolent, as if a nightmare had leapt into reality. Facing this demonic shadow, Batu actually did not know whether the red light came from the projection or from the void. He only saw Gang Xiong take a defensive stance. His body shone with a metallic luster as he roared and retreated. At this moment, Batu had already smashed open the door of the opposite room and slid in. But in just 1/100th of a second, the red light had already covered him. The most terrible thing was that the energy of this red light did not rush outwards, but was pulling in the opposite direction. It was like an invisible whirlpool, forcefully pulling Batu's body towards the area where the blood-red light was the thickest. That center might be the fatal gates of hell. Ah! Batu desperately stretched out his hand, wanting to grab the door frame of the opposite room. But the moment his fingers touched the frame, the suction suddenly disappeared. He slammed onto the ground, his head dizzy and his legs weak. He subconsciously turned around to take a look. The destruction of the equipment in the room was expected, but the destructive power was not as great as he had imagined. In front of the sand table, Gang Xiong stood with his back facing the door. He did not move, but his body seemed to be trembling nonstop. "Mr. Gang Xiong?" Batu asked in a probing manner. Before he finished speaking, he saw Gang Xiong's enormous body instantly bend and twist. His muscles and bones shrunk into a ball amidst the fine, tearing sounds. Then it suddenly stretched, collapsed, and shattered. The same fate also included those operatives on the ground. An invisible force field covered the entire room, leading everything, but Batu would rather believe that it was a demonic plate of flesh and blood that came from hell. The tearing sound that made one's teeth ache finally turned into a muffled explosion. Blood fog filled the room, and in front of the wantonly smeared colors, Batu's mind was blank. But in his wide, open eyes, a figure was reflected. The blood fog that enveloped his body gradually became clear. Gang Xiong. He knew he called the wrong name without saying it, but Batu still could not help it. Where the blood fog gathered, that person turned around. This was a middle-aged man with an ordinary appearance. Compared to the human-shaped giant bear Gang Xiong, he was much thinner, but his body was also very strong. He was naked, not wearing a single thread of clothing. His eyes swept across the room and finally fixed on Batu swore that he had never seen such a cold and empty gaze. Those eyes seemed to be filled with countless layers of black fog, and he could never see them clearly. But why did he feel that they were so familiar? Chapter 506. As his body gradually approached the surface of the sea, the light, sound, and subtle changes in temperature from the shallow water, as well as the lazily swimming fishes and shrimps, formed a vivid picture. Zhang Yingying's mind seemed to have melted into this shallow sea. Only the white rainbow was still vibrating, as if it hadn't had enough. But Zhang Yingying's head popped out of the sea and shook her head. Her cheeks touched some fine floating ice. These translucent ice shards floated and sank on the surface of the sea. Just by glancing at them, one could feel the bone-piercing cold. She didn't care about this. She just took a breath of air that she hadn't breathed in for a long time, and cold water droplets fell. Compared to the seawater, the freezing rain falling from the sky was even colder. It was said that this freezing rain, which was outside of the forecast, had been entrenched in Xia City for nearly 10 hours, and there were still no signs of it stopping. Zhang Yingying stepped on the water unhurriedly. At the same time, she exhaled the old and inhaled the new. She adapted to the temperature difference of nearly 20 degrees inside and outside the sea. Her improved physical fitness quickly suppressed the slight discomfort. After her body felt more comfortable, she blew a breath of air at the surface of the floating ice. The air that should have been warm blew out a sharp and cold smell. A shallow crack extended from the surface of the sea in front of him until it reached 30 meters away before disappearing. Baihong's power continues to increase. I can now be considered a sword fairy who can kill people with a breath. Zhang Yingying licked the corner of her lips. She had to admit that her lips and tongue were a little numb just now, and there was a small crack on the inside of her lips. This was the price of acting tough. Compared to the rapid advancement of the white rainbow innate skill, the strength of her body was actually unable to keep up. This was a rather bizarre matter. It could be said that his body and soul were out of balance, but it was a bit different. He would have to ask Her Majesty Empress Wu for guidance when he returned. Of course, they could consult him at any time. She had been bored at the bottom of the sea for almost 10 days, so she had to relax no matter what. Today just so happened to be Sunday. Taking a few of his best friends out for a walk or two in the wilderness would be the happiest thing in life. With that in mind, Zhang Yingying also turned on the Hexa-Ear's voice connection function. Soon, a series of push notifications sounded. At this time, she had already arrived at the bottom of the cliff, facing the sea with the push of the waves. She skillfully jumped and climbed the cliff. The most eye-catching message came from Bai Xinyan. The weather in Xia City was clearly gloomy and damp, with freezing rain falling down. But the selfie of these sisters was a picture of the sun shining brightly and the sea of palms. Especially the angle of her selfie, it was obvious that she was lying on a beach chair. The photo was taken from her chest, revealing not only her crazy long legs, but also her first-class curves. Under the sunlight, her white, jade-like skin was even more dazzling. By Xinyan's self-evaluation of this photo, which was enough to make men lick their screens, was, enjoy the sunshine, cherish life. Zhang Yingying liked the post and commented, "Slut, who are you trying to seduce with old photos?" Ding dong, the other side actually replied within seconds, "It's obviously the latest." New. Only then did Zhang Yingying realize that something was wrong. At this time, another voice rang out. It was still by Xinyan, using this to seduce a 16-year-old boy. Will he be forgiven? Starting from 3 years. But for an old woman like you, it's a huge profit. And why does this sound so wrong? She sent him a private message. Where are you? Let's go shopping. Hee, in Chan City, you can enjoy 2 kinds of holidays. What did you get there? Last night, in Xia City. The weather isn't good, so hurry up and run. Zhang Yingying clicked her tongue. She felt that it was strange. She understood her friend's personality very well. The more senseless her words were, the more often there was a deeper meaning behind them. Did something happen? Bai Xinyan didn't say anything more to her. See you in spring. You have to seize the moment to enjoy life and the sunshine. It was as if she had a terminal illness. Tui. Zhang Yingying wanted to ask a few more questions, but at this time, the topic she had been paying attention to was updated. It was on the headquarters website. Her Majesty Empress Wu had personally issued the RT-83 13 Honor Points mission. It was supposed to be a historical number of people replying to the mission, and it was a benign exchange of pointers. But now, that loathsome RE and her inventions of Spray Pot Man and Summer Blow had led it astray. It had become a battlefield for territorial killings. If it weren't for the fact that she was at a critical juncture in her cultivation, Zhang Yingying would have long since taken command and gone to war with those scum from headquarters. She hadn't vented in time, so she had been holding her breath. She maintained a high degree of attention and intense obsession with the situation over there. But what the hell was with this push news? Who gave this news to? Holy crap. Exploration News Agency, Xia City, December 9th. The Xia City Security Bureau has confirmed on the evening of the 8th that riots occurred in many areas of the city, resulting in many deaths. The Xia City Police Department has posted on their official social media accounts that the riots occurred around 2200 hours on the 8th. They involve a wide area, and the composition of the participants is complex. At present, 47 people have died in the riots. Of the 24 administrative districts of Xia City, 12 have already entered a state of emergency. The press release was in a rigid format, but the explosive content made people dumbfounded. Zhang Yingying was like this. She had already climbed to the middle section of the cliff, where she was temporarily resting in her little nest. She didn't have the mood to rest after seeing this news. She didn't even change out of her diving suit. She continued to climb and jump. She crossed over 2 layers of road and arrived at the very top of the cliff. It was also the highest point of the surrounding coastline. She climbed high and looked into the distance. She saw small patrol boats shuttling back and forth in the distant sea. She could even faintly see the silhouette of large warships on the surface of the sea, even further away. She looked inland. There were very few vehicles on the Huanhai Highway. There were only a few armored vehicles. Could it be that there was a coup? Zhang Yingying subconsciously opened the topic page and unmuted the many discussion groups. Sure enough, whether it was the headquarters intranet or the Xia City Psychic Wave Network, the atmosphere had already exploded. There were far too many and too messy messages. Just RT-8313 alone had several thousand replies in a single night. There were many new memes interspersed within them. At first glance, it seemed as if it had been abandoned by history. Zhang Yingying could only start from the last floor she paid attention to. She climbed up the floors one by one to revise. She also read the news to make up for her lessons. It didn't take long for her to find the most important floor amidst the flood of replies. It was probably due to the excitement that caused his hands to tremble and his tongue to tremble. The speaker left behind a paragraph of confusing logic and subtle meaning. I don't know if it's drooping or not. I only know that Grandma's dripping sword is too terrifying. Her terror in Xia City is multiplied by 2. Fortunately, this message was accompanied by a more realistic video. Combined with the content of the video, it should be nighttime in Sia City. A large number of police cars and related police personnel were parked at the intersection of the streets. They were densely packed, but what was even more eye-catching was a corpse being carried out from the crowd. The person who recorded the video should be an internal member of the police. They even had the opportunity to do a close-up of the corpse's face. At first, the camera didn't capture the main point. It wavered on the corpse's fine armor, body characteristics, and other aspects. But soon, the person who recorded the video focused on the corpse's head. The eyes, nose, and mouth were all dark with blood, especially the eyes. They were abnormally swollen. The crystal in one of the eye sockets had already exploded, leaving behind a black and red blood clot. What does this have to do with the dripping sword? It was a thoughtless message left by someone who didn't know the ropes. In the blink of an eye, people from all walks of life were educated. Please seriously watch Her Majesty Empress Wu's teaching video. This is how the dripping sword dies when it hits the eyes. This is the result of the dripping sword stabbing into the eye socket and then exploding after striking the brain. The cranial pressure rapidly rises, causing the 7 orifices to bleed. This person's brain is certainly already a lump of paste. There might even be brain juice in the blood flowing out of the 5 orifices. If you ask me, this appearance may look scary, but it's actually not the best. The most brilliant method should be to simply destroy the brain tissue, causing a person to die without a sound. But this method is too smoky. Although the last comment was a bit pretentious, it was still relatively pertinent. Quite a few people expressed their approval. But the facts prove that this pretentious criminal had revealed his true colors too early. The person who first uploaded the video soon posted a second video. Following the video, fully armed corpses were carried out one after another. The entire comments section trembled. How many people have died in total? From what I can see, there are no less than 15. I looked at it frame by frame. The video shows 17 people. At the end of the video, the camera turned to a skyscraper on the side of the street. The words Sia City XXX Hotel were written on it, proving the location. What happened to Sia City? The 17 people all died in the same way. They were all armed and armed personnel. The time of death seems to be relatively close. No matter how I look at it, it doesn't seem like they were tortured to death. In other words, the time of death of these people is very close. Perhaps it was only a few breaths of time. The one who used the dripping sword was actually a machine gun user, right? Some people didn't even have the safety on their guns. In the end, how simple were their deaths? Requesting ultra-clear pictures of the scene of the incident. As long as one stayed on this topic, most of them would be practitioners and enthusiasts of the dripping sword. What they loved the most was to analyze the structure of the dripping sword and unearth its potential. Therefore, when the 2 videos came out, the enthusiasm of the people rapidly exploded. And just as the people were discussing this scene spiritedly, it was already the 9th. In other words, it was around 5 o'clock in the morning. What followed was the news that Zhang Yingying had seen before. It made all the ability users who were paying attention to this matter understand. The death toll and the scene of the incident were far from what they understood from the video. There were less than 20 corpses at the scene. Where were the rest? Did they die in the same way? Did I float in the air the wrong way? Zhang Yingying couldn't help but ridicule herself. The atmosphere of Sia City was a complete mess overnight. As for herself, she couldn't help but think of a certain spray pot man when she saw the dripping sword. But even if she thought about it with her toes, this sort of pure slaughter wasn't something a child would do. As for the machine gun-style killing technique, aside from Her Majesty the Empress Wu, she really hadn't seen anyone else perform a similar demonstration. Just as she was letting her imagination run wild, a new related push notification arrived. It was a link to a live broadcast. She subconsciously clicked on it and saw a capable and experienced woman give a thumbs up from behind the screen. Frontline dispatch, life combustion. I am a battlefield reporter who accidentally traveled to Sia City.